Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone out to the public hearing regarding the 2021 district budget. Before I turn some time over to Mr. Cruz, I'd like to read the following. Public comments regarding the 2021 district budget. Individuals wishing to make public comments concerning this proposed budget should email the Secretary of the Board at knamika@lewispalmer.org using subject line budget comment. No later than 12 noon on Monday, June 20th, the date of this meeting. Written comments must be no more than 400 words, approximately 3 minutes. Must clearly identify the submitter by name and must not contain any profanity, must not reference student names, and must not defame individuals by name. Comments that do not abide by these requirements will not be shared publicly. Following Mr. Cruz's overview presentation, public comments related to the 2021 budget will be read into the record. Okay, with that being said, Mr. Cruz, we'll turn the time over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Mr. Clausen. I'll go ahead and start with the budget presentation. Is that all right, Dr. Summers?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Mr. Clausen, just to confirm, do you want the presentation now or do you want it in the action section of the agenda? We can do either, whatever your preference.
Well, I'm just looking at the agenda, and I apologize if I misread it. It just said the Executive Director of Finance, Mr. Cruz, would present an overview of the budget. So it doesn't matter to me if we do it now or during the board meeting.
My recommendation might be to, unless there is public comment, can we check on that first with Ms. Namika? Because it may be more appropriate to have the presentation built into the board discussion action item section. There's just quite a bit in there, and we wanted to give opportunity for questions, comments, et cetera. So if that's okay with you, maybe it's best to forward that into section D, that first item.
Okay. Ms. Namika, are there any public comments?
There were no budget comments received.
All right, thank you. Ms. Upchurch, do you have any objections if we just consolidate this presentation into section D as Dr. Summers proposed?
No, sir. I was just going to ask, do we have public comments?
Okay. Ms. Phillips?
No problem.
Mr. Schwartz?
I agree.
Mr. Taylor?
I'm good, thanks.
All right. With that being said, I believe that concludes the public hearing regarding proposed 2021 budget. So we will move into our regular agenda. Ms. Namika, would you please take the roll call?
Mr. Clausen.
Here.
Ms. Phillips.
Here.
Mr. Schwartz.
Here.
Mr. Taylor.
Here.
Ms. Upchurch.
Here.
Thank you. To view this meeting's presentation documents, please access Board Docs. The link to Board Docs website can be found via the D38 website, www.lewispalmer.org, on the Board of Education /meeting webpage. Ms. Phillips, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. I would like to make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
Any questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, Ms. Namika?
Mr. Clausen.
Aye.
Ms. Phillips.
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Aye.
All right, thank you, Ms. Namika. All right, I'd like to read the public comment guidelines. Per board policy BEDH, Public participation at school board meetings, there is one time for public comment and it is limited to 30 minutes. In an effort to allow all who wish to speak, the amount of time dedicated to each speaker will be dependent upon the number of people who sign up, with entire public comment period not exceeding 30 minutes. If 10 people or fewer sign up, each person will have 3 minutes to address the board. During meetings held through electronic participation only, members of the public shall be allowed to address the board by sending written comments to the secretary of the board at knamika@lewispalmer.org, identifying the subject public comment. In the subject line of the email, comments must be received by 12 noon, the day of the meeting. Written comments must not be more than 400 words, approximately 3 minutes, must clearly identify the submitter by name, and must not contain any profanity, must not reference student names, and must not defame individuals by name. Public comments that do not abide by these requirements will not be shared publicly. The board respects the rights of the public to speak on matters concerning the operation of the schools. We believe that public comments that are critical to district staff, however, often cause unnecessary harm to those employees and the education of our students. As a result, we prefer that members of the public share any criticisms of employees in writing with the superintendent, who is responsible for supervising all staff and then involving the board as necessary. If you choose instead to address personnel issues publicly, please understand the board does not endorse the comments of any speaker and reminds all who speak that they assume the risk of legal action by district employees in the event the affected employees believe that any comments about them violate legal standards. Lastly, keep in mind we may have K through 12 students in the audience or viewing online. Please keep all comments appropriate for our audience. Okay. And with that being said, Ms. Namika, are there any public comments?
We received 5 public comments.
Okay. Would you be gracious enough to read those into the record, please?
I certainly will. Our first comment is from Michelle Sokol. D38 Board of Education. Thank you for the work you have put in to determine what D38 will look like in fall of 2020. I know none of you imagined you would be in this position when you were elected to the board. I am writing today to urge you to give D38 families a choice this year. First, let me say that the worst possible solution for our children and our teachers is opening with ridiculous and impossible restrictions in place. It is not practical or in the best interest of our schools to have children and teachers wearing masks, not allowed lunch and recess, avoiding all contact with each other, and trying to learn in an environment of fear. I, for one, will not be enrolling my children if these are the circumstances they are being forced to learn in. I refuse to allow them to live in a state of fear and anxiety over a virus that has proven to not have a significant impact on people under the age of 18. I understand that there are teachers who are not ready to come back to classes for health reasons and parents who do not feel comfortable sending children back to school in these times. In March, basic e-learning practices were put into place, and I think by combining what was done with more time and planning, these students and teachers can work together to achieve high-quality online learning. There are also teachers who are more than ready to get back in the classroom, and families who feel that being back in a normal school environment is what is best for their children. Our children have already paid a heavy price. I realize closing in March had to be done, but it has now been shown that our children are not in immediate danger. Continuing to sacrifice their mental health in the name of protecting the more vulnerable is not acceptable. I could have homeschooled my children if all I wanted was for them to learn facts. I choose school because I want them to learn to respect other adults and authority. I want them to hear different points of view and learn to think critically. I want them to engage with their peers and learn to work together, problem solve, navigate relationships, and manage conflicts. These vital lessons cannot be taught through e-learning or in an environment of fear. Please allow D38 families their choice of how they wish to enroll for fall this year. Thank you, Michelle Sokol, parent of a 3rd grader and a preschooler. The second comment is from Raquel and Ken Huisman. My name is Raquel Huisman, and my husband Ken and I have had children attending D38 since the fall of 2013. Next year, we will have 3 children in 3 different D38 schools, a 9th, a 7th, and a 5th grader. After the COVID-19 pandemic hit our world, our schools adjusted amazingly well to what was thrown our way. Teachers, parents, and school district staff all stepped up and did the best we could under the circumstances. However, unfortunately, that learning environment model was not ideal. We are writing this email to let it be known that for the upcoming school year, commencing August of 2020, we would request that school resume as normal, i.e., no masks, children still have lunches in the cafeteria, recesses outside, bus transportation, and changing of classrooms as they have in the past for middle school and high school levels. We would prefer no remote learning to take place for our children, although possibly a remote learning option could be made available to those teachers who prefer to teach that model and to those families that prefer to learn that way. For those of us who are unable to continue a remote learning model or hybrid of, please let us go back to normal. Thank you for your time. Sincerely, Ken and Raquel Huisman. Third comment is from Maura Nordberg. My name is Maura Nordberg. I plan to have a kindergarten and second grade student attending school in Lewis Palmer School District in the 2021 school year. Prior to staying home with our children, I worked as a school psychologist in Colorado Springs for 6 years. As you are well aware, our children are resilient, which we have seen firsthand this spring, but children also need structure, consistent routines, and a nurturing environment to thrive. Schools have always done this, but the recommendations provided by the CDC severely limit this. Face masks covering half of an individual's face interfere with and inhibit nonverbal communication. Social distancing interferes with relationship development, comfort in schools, social engagement, and so much more. Unfortunately, the research has shown the e-learning had the greatest negative outcomes for children in the highest risk categories. I believe the recommended educational accommodations do the same, leaving kids with the greatest needs at the greatest disadvantage yet again. From my perspective, if school doesn't look like school did prior to allowing my children to feel safe and comfortable, allowing them to thrive socially with their teacher and peers, with a focus on the children growing academically, it will be our choice to remove our children from school and homeschool. I know various opinions are held in this area, but opening with options, including options with minimal COVID accommodations, would be my hope. I am well aware that the Department of Public Health and Environment and Governor Polis may not leave these decisions to your choosing, but I plea that where you have control, you allow school to return as we knew it to be. Our children need it for their long-term development, for their overall health and well-being. Thank you for your hard work and dedication. All of your efforts to move forward in the best interest of our children is appreciated. Sincerely, Maura Nordberg. Fourth comment is from Scott Saunders. I am writing to request to express my strong preference that school return to normal next year and that District 38 provide a waiver for the majority, I suspect, of parents locally that do not want their kids to wear masks at school. As far as COVID-19, the facts are clear that this is not a major issue for our youth. Between February and May 2020, 19 children under the age of 14 died from COVID-19 per a recent article on Reuters.com. During the same time frame, almost 4 times more died of the flu. More died of car accidents during this same time frame. I realize a very small percentage of predominantly older teachers may be concerned they are in a higher risk category. If they are concerned, they can choose to wear a mask or teach online, but don't negatively impact the 99% of our youth locally for a very small percentage of adults. If it's for the kids, then please do what is best for the kids, not a very minute percentage of grown adults. The emotional, mental, social development needs of all D38 school-age children are so important, and returning to anything less than a normal school environment without masks or other restrictions would harm thousands of children locally. Scott Saunders. And our last comment is from Amy McKenzie. As you are planning for various reopening scenarios for schools this fall, please consider the following. 1, CDC statistics show that a child's risk of dying from COVID-19 are 0.0%. 2, per CDC, children don't transmit COVID-19 to others. 3, social distancing and isolation have multiple negative effects, including depression, lack of interest, poor sleep, lowered immunity, cognitive decline, etc. 4, students are sliding back in their educational gains as e-learning continues. Your own charts showed a drop in student engagement in just 2 weeks. 5, governors can offer guidelines, but our district ultimately has local control. 6, lawsuits against school districts may spike if districts are not providing the full education for students they are required to provide by law. 7, state funding cuts, in addition to parents possibly pulling their kids to homeschool, do existing online programs, or transfer to neighboring districts with school back to normal options, will hinder district available funds even more. For all of the aforementioned reasons and more, please reopen schools as normal with no restrictions and waiver signing, and provide an online option for families who don't want their kids to return in person. Our kids deserve it. Thank you, Amy McKenzie.
Thank you, Ms. Namika. Now we'll move forward with the board member comments. Ms. Upchurch, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Clausen. Can you guys hear me?
We can. Thank you.
I wanted to start off by saying congratulations to our 2 graduating classes. I attended graduation and from both schools, and the tenacity and the poise of those students during a time was both melancholy and celebratory, if that makes any sense at all. It was just inspiring to be there and be a part of this particular year's graduation. So congratulations to the parents and the staff and the students of the class of 2020. And I'm glad that we got to be one of the first school districts to be able to have our parents attend live. It was such a short notice, and I'm very impressed with how quickly we were able to come together and make it happen for those that care so much deeply. So thank you, Dr. Summers and your staff, and to our principals and the schools for putting that together. I also wanted to say congratulations to the 2 new MA board members. I was unable to attend MA's June 9th board meeting, but Mr. Mark McWilliams and Mike Molson are termed out and have been replaced by Misty McEwen and Ryan Graham. So congratulations to the 2 new MA board members that will be sworn in July. The legislative session just wrapped up. There were several bills that have passed for education that are still waiting governor's signature. There will be 2 ballot initiatives, one pertaining to the Gallagher Amendment and one on tobacco tax. Both are set to be able to help education. I don't know what those will look like. I don't think any of us do yet. There's a CASB briefing or legislative wrap-up session that I will be attending online this week on the 24th. And with that, it's been certainly been a whirlwind of a summer. And as we go into tonight's budget meeting, I have to say that I've been impressed and appreciative of each department's communication, the humbleness, and the openness in this process during these uncertain and unprecedented times, as we've been seeking and gaining input from families and staff, and using that info to collaborate with our volunteers of students and parents and teachers, community members, regional leaders, to learn and develop our own unique community-driven strategic plans, and looking at offering options and opportunities that meet the educational needs of each child, which I know we'll be discussing later tonight. And this has been no small task, but I'm honored and I've been excited by the open doors and world of possibilities. I continue to ask questions such as, how can we ensure our students are growing and learning to their fullest extent in the safest and most secure and least restrictive environment? And how can we support and honor our amazing teachers and staff with the limited resources? And how can we ensure our families can be confident in the education their children are receiving here? And how can we continue to build strong relationships and collaboration with our community members? What will education look like in our district in the fall? And how are we navigating budget cuts from the state? And how are we aligning our long-term strategic goals? And what does success look like in a district like ours? So I just want to say thank you to my fellow board members and to our community and to our families that have reached out with emails, calls, and comments. And thank you to our staff at Big Red and to all of our schools and our teachers as this summer continues to build into what next year looks like. And I'm excited to see what we have in store. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Upchurch. Ms. Phillips.
Thank you. First, I'd like to congratulate the administrative team as well on both high school graduations. I've only received positive communications since the end of last week's ceremonies. And the more I learned while I was there in person on both days, the more I had great admiration and appreciation for all that went into producing those celebratory few hours. And I know it was greatly appreciated by so many of the families and the graduates themselves. The other two items that have been taking intense time and energy continue to be the budget development and the school reopening plan. Much effort has gone into these items, both from a board perspective and from the administrative end. Dr. Summers, together with 5 other district superintendents, retained district management group to help facilitate the formation of a school reopening plan, developed collaboratively with the community. And DMG is by no means writing this plan. They provide support, feedback, research briefs, best practices, and perspectives from districts around the country right now. They are creating Excel tools and guides for best safety practices, as well as helping to facilitate and guide collaborative group work. They're partnering, researching, and analyzing early drafts for us. And I'm serving on the steering committee, where they have offered a plethora of ideas while also aiding in the navigation of the sheer volume of logistical and learning aspects to consider. We have very strong professionals on our administrative team. These circumstances have produced conditions that are beyond what a team our district size can adequately convert to a functional and high-performing system in just 2 months. I've appreciated the collaborative, region-wide approach that Dr. Summers has invested with his time and energy, knowing that he and his team alone could not have produced the desired result that he envisions given this short time frame. This comprehensive and efficient approach has allowed our staff to focus on the specifics as they pertain to Lewis Palmer School District 38 and each individual school site, and/or specific aspects with regard to transportation, nutrition services, homeschool enrichment, and so on. I know that there have been many questions regarding the formulation of the reopening plan and whether it has involved community members and is collaborative. Unequivocally, it is. I'd also like to add a few words this evening to acknowledge the current unrest felt across the country and our world. I want every child to know that their lives matter and that Black lives matter. I've been on a number of webinars regarding racial equality this past month, both as a teacher and a musician. It's utterly important that we as policymakers and as a board continue to provide for our children a future that is anti-racist, provides educational equity, and is a welcome place for students and all staff. And we as leaders can model this. It starts at the top, and it starts with actually acknowledging that there's civil unrest and it's affecting our students. Our students, my children included, are on social media and they are seeing what's going on. We can use this as a way to start the conversations, both in the classroom, at home, and as an educational system. It's time to open our eyes, our ears, and minds to waves of discomfort, learning, and growing. We can choose to lean into the tense and fraught conversations about race within our community. We can listen to the voices within our communities who don't need to be lent a hand, but they need to be respected and valued. As we model listening and responding with thought and action, we're modeling for our students and children a way forward that is more inclusive and equitable. In order to be successful, we should be vulnerable enough to admit that we don't have all the answers. We must recognize that innovative solutions come from bringing everyone to the table. We must be willing to confront racism in ourselves and to address it in our institutions. I urge my fellow board members and our administration to consider this as we move forward with future policies and the formation of our strategic plan that meets the needs of each and every student and all of our families. I'd just like to conclude with a part of a letter written by 4-star Air Force General John W. Raymond, United States Space Force, on June 2nd regarding racism. Quote, "Now is time to uphold and defend our oath, and we have work to do. Every one of us must own this problem. It is not enough to assume that the issue is not there because you do not witness direct evidence. We all have blind spots, and we all know biases show up in subtle ways but have significant impact. I urge you to look deeper, ask hard questions, have uncomfortable conversations, observe daily routines from a new perspective." End quote. I believe this applies to so much of everything we are currently working through as a board and a public school district these past 3 months. I want to thank each of my fellow board members for your continued time, energy, and effort on numerous fronts the past few months. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Mr. Taylor?
Thank you. So I wanted to just talk about a couple of things from our annual audit. One is that the Lewis Palmer School District mill levy at the end of 2018, 2019 was at the lowest level in the prior 10 years. And this year it continued to drop further. At the same time, the Tri-Lakes Fire District more than doubled. And the town of Palmer Lake went up by 25%. And so and then the Tri-View Metro District is a flat 35 mills. But a lot of the property tax increase that I felt in my taxes were more due to fire safety than it was to the school cost. So I just want to highlight the fact that the mill levy for our school district is at the lowest level it's been in the last 20 years in the year 2019-20. I also want to point out that our student count from 2010 was 5,606, and it has fluctuated between that and a high this year of 6,435. So that's an increase of approximately 800, just about 800 students over the last 10 years. And it's a slow, steady increase. Who knows what the current pandemic is going to do to student count and population and economics, etc. But there's no tsunami of growth that we were being presented with for the last couple of years. The student-teacher ratio for the last 3 years has been 21.2, 21.27, 21.36. So student-teacher ratios remain relatively steady. And over the last 10 years, it's ranged from 18.56 up to a high of 22.3, with the last 3 years being closer to the 21.3 level. And I'm going to skip the demographics for this. I do want to talk to the following, though. That is in the 2018 bond that was defeated in the general election. There was a request in there for safety, some capital expenditures for safety. So as an example, a new vestibule at Bear Creek, Lewis Palmer, Palmer Lake, etc. So there's a list of these various safety issues. Well, given the well-articulated social issues that we have, including the riots, including the damage, including the shootings, I mean, it just doesn't seem to stop, which is a sad thing, and it tears my heart apart. But unfortunately, as Ms. Phillips articulated, we can't help but see it. And so I still feel very strongly that we need safe environment for our students and our staff and our teachers. I would like the board to consider, and in this conversation tonight, asking the admin to revisit the concept of a capital spend at each school to increase the security. And oh, by the way, perhaps we should also include in those vegetables, I'm sorry, I said that so poorly, I apologize. We should include in that a cost of being able to monitor temperature, which is one of the indicators of potential virus. If we had a security entranceway that was increased the safety, the physical safety of our children, we could also include in that the health safety of our children and anyone who tries to enter the building from any age. for any reason, if their temperatures are too high, then they should not be allowed to enter, and they should be, if they're children, sent home or set aside in a safe place until their parents could retrieve them. But, it's about our children. And I don't know what you all think about this, but I would like the board to consider, even as going as far as as a resolution later in this meeting, to consider asking our administration to look at what are the real costs to add that kind of physical security that includes security, if you will, from a virus, so that we can have inside our schools as normal of a education as possible. It seems to me, given the data that we have today, which we did not have 3 months ago, so I'm not going to second guess based on information. The fear that we had 3 months ago was real, and it was real for everyone, and the whole country shut down as a result. But the data that's coming in now suggests that there is a real issue with this virus, and it's a deadly virus. But we shouldn't quarantine the healthy. We should really focus on quarantine those who are affected and try and protect the larger population of healthy people so that life can be as normal as possible. That's all I have for the board member comments, and I'll save some other thoughts for later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Schwartz?
Thank you, Mr. Clausen. Just a very brief note of congratulations and thanks to Dr. Summers and staff for successfully engaging graduation of both high schools in person. I did a little bit of research, and it turns out there are very, very, very few high schools in the entire nation that were able to do what this district did. So kudos to you for not taking no for an answer, finding a safe and quality and class act way to do it and getting it done. And also congratulations to the graduating seniors and our elementary and middle schoolers who are going forward. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. I want to thank my fellow board members for their comments this evening. As they've spoken, I keep on crossing a couple of my comments off the list. When I ran for the school board a couple years ago, one of my primary reasons was because we need to focus on the kids. Everything that we do is about our kids that attend District 38 and Monument Academy. And the other idea that was very important to me is local control. We here in District 38, Monument, Tri-Lakes area, are in the best position to determine what's good for our kids, not Denver or any other entity. So with that being said, I'm very impressed with how quickly Dr. Summers and his team was able to modify the kind of the graduation setup, so as it were, to address the changes that we received from Denver just a short time before. But quite frankly, how we and when we had graduation, that should have been our decision. We've heard a lot of discussion about when Governor Polis might allow schools to open, the dynamics surrounding that. I believe that we need to protect our kids. We need to protect our teachers and all the team members, but ultimately that should be our decisions based on the values and the circumstances of our community. I too am very interested in normalizing school for our kids. I have 3 kids that are attending District 38 schools, and as I previously expressed, there's no one that's more eager for the kids to go back to school than my wife. She's done a great job, but the learning hasn't quite been the same for our kids. So we're looking forward to a time that things will be a little more normal. I asked Dr. Summers to take a few minutes later in this board meeting to kind of give us an update on kind of where we stand. Want to thank and congratulate everyone for the 2 graduations. It took a lot to put that together. We made changes, as I articulated, at the very last minute. But and I also want to thank my fellow board members. We all except for one board member attending each graduation, we elected not to attend graduation to allow more teachers and administrative staff to be there in our place. And it's the first graduation I've missed. And it was hard, but the bottom line is it was more important for the teachers and staff to be there than a couple board members. So thank you, and I want to congratulate our high school seniors, and I wish them nothing but the best moving forward. And with that being said, that concludes my comments. So Dr. Summers, you're next on the agenda.
Thanks, Mr. Clausen. Thank you, each and every board member, for your continued support, your comments this evening. You guys have touched on a lot, so I appreciate the words that you've shared, your sentiments, your support. Certainly would also extend appreciation and gratitude for the efforts of both of our high school staffs and the support from the community. The true reward from graduation was really to see each and every one of our graduates from the class of 2020 be able to have their moment as best as we could produce it. And certainly there was a lot of behind the scenes work and extra hours that went into all of that, but our kids deserved it, our families deserved it. So thanks for recognizing the fact that there was a lot that went into all of that. As you know, there's a lot that goes into everything as we're dealing with the crises that we're confronted with right now in terms of COVID-19 and a lot of the racial tension that we're experiencing that's probably more pronounced recently than has been for some time. But I also think that these are issues, well, certainly from a racial tension perspective, that it's important that we are leaning in as a community. I appreciate what Ms. Phillips said about having courageous conversations right now. And there's no easy answers to it, but our kids are paying attention, they are listening. And so it's our job to make sure that we are creating structured and safe environments for that dialogue to occur. I also think we are challenged with probably the most difficult thing that we've experienced in some time in terms of preparing for a back to school plan that certainly has to address multiple challenges and complexities. So we're excited to share with you where we're at in that process this evening. This is a collaborative process and one that we'll spend some more time on as we dive into that. And I just want to add one more line of appreciation for our team, all of our staff members, in particular, our district administration team right now that has been spending hours both every day, into the evenings, into the weekend, producing a final budget for you, producing a plan that is going to be consistent with the values and the aspirations and ideals that we have in our community for the students and families that we serve. So we're excited about sharing more of that information with you here this evening. And again, thank you for your continued support.
Thank you, Dr. Summers. Then we'll move on to section D, board discussion regarding the approval adoption of the school district budget for the fiscal year of 2021 and related resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Clausen. Good evening, board. All right, Vicki, you have it up there. What we want to do is just briefly give you a synopsis of our budget for this year. The one that we had last month, we made some modifications to it as far as revenue, the inflation adjustment of 1.9%, changed the PPOR based on the finalization of this budget. So our 2021 final budget assumptions, the budget was built with revenue reduction to base funding, like we talked about, equaling the $7,084 per pupil operating revenue. In that assumption, in that budget design, we had no salary increases, steps or levels. That's currently reflected in there, as well as we didn't do anything looking at any 1%. Every percentage of salary increase is roughly around $3 million. And we did not, like we said, we remained this budget flat. And so that was not added into the budget. We had our expenditure reductions that we talked about previously, Currently, it's about $2 million that's maintained in the expenditure side of the budget. And then we also had our increases with our para increases, went from 20.5% to 20.9% with our match as a district, as well as the changes in our healthcare. We wanted to absorb the healthcare increases that you can see there were equivalent to about $332,000. This slide really didn't change from the last time we presented this to you earlier this month. You can see that where we were as far as our draft budget changes and where our final budget lies. What we're going to go into a little bit more on is reductions and adjustments. If you want to go to the next slide. So these were our main areas of where we had to reduce: the curriculum, tech, professional development sources. That equaled the $390,000. Our staffing reductions, so central office as well as school-based, $350,000 and $850,000. The supply budgets, we reduced, mostly at the schools, we reduced about a 15% change there. But total across the district was $230,000. And then also our special education adjustments there equaling 180. So the total there was that $2 million reduction with our staffing and our other pieces too. Okay, this is my favorite slide, and I'll tell you why. As we went to print, our base funding was at $7,084. We believe if the student enrollment that we based it on, which was 6,481, remains around the same, that our anticipated PPR is going to actually increase to 7,653. So as we finalize this budget, knowing in the fall, once we get a better understanding of where our enrollment lies, we'll be able to adjust the revenue and increase it significantly. So as we produced a draft budget at 15% reduction in revenue, and then we finalized the budget at about a 12% reduction in revenue, it actually is going to come in probably around 6% reduction, which as we really took a conservative approach in our expenditures, this is going to be nice to be able to go back and review as we develop our strategic plan, our goals, our direction that we want to go, because we know economically that this is probably going to hit us for the next few years, not just this year. Well, we can make some decisions, and we'll have a little bit more revenue there to do some of the things that we wanted to do that maybe we reduced in our initial budget. So that total is about $3.6 million in revenue increase.
David, could I ask a question there? Just
Yes.
a clarification. So if you went back 2 slides. Yeah, that one. So in here, this was the numbers that we were presented as you went through the detailed budget in April and May and earlier in June. I just wanted to point out that in here is a one-time CARES Act revenue of $2.2 million, which, even if we get the 3.6 or whatever the revenue adjustment ends up being, we have to remember this is a one-time reimbursement from the federal government, so it's not something that is recurring or that we can count on. And that was the one thing I wanted to point out here, just to be clear of that entire chart. Everything there is well presented, and we've been through with a fine-tooth comb. But that $2.2 million is a one-time. I just wanted to highlight it as a part of that discussion about the fact that you, as an administration, went to a baseline budgeting, worst-case scenario, and it doesn't look like we're going to be at the worst-case scenario, which is a good thing. However, it still is a 6% cut across the board, even if we get that higher revenue number. And that $2.2 million there is a one-time help from the federal government, not recurring.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Absolutely.
So something, if you don't mind me pointing out too, that the legislature talked about, and I don't recall details and numbers, but I believe there was a bill passed to address some of that, also to offset future monies in the form of, they reduced some of the tax exemptions that are, and some of that money is supposed to go back into K-12 education. But I don't know the full details. I haven't read the full brief on that, but that could be, I just remember them talking about that as far as how CARES, this year's CARES, beyond this year's CARES Act, it would kick in afterwards. Mr. Cruz, I don't know if you or Dr. Summers, if you guys have any better insight than I can provide.
Yeah, briefly, Ms. Upchurch, that is a change to the state's tax code, which I am not an expert in exactly all of the differences that were being addressed, but it's about 156 million over the next 3 years that is intended to backfill some of the loss from K-12. Obviously, when you have about a $1.2 billion budget stabilization factor, that's not a huge amount of money, but every little bit counts. So that is one of the pieces of legislation that did take place in the final days of that session.
Mr. Cruz,
Yes.
just to clarify on Mr. Taylor's comment, I believe there were 2 CARES Act line items in that slide, which just rounding would take the total to 2.5 million on a one-time basis. Is that correct?
It is. We received about just a little over 2.5 in the CARES money, and then we distributed money, took some of that money and moved it over to MA. And that's the same thing we're going to do with the ESSER money. It comes in, and you can see it reflects there at 244. So the reduction of MA is already in there. We haven't received that money yet, but yes, that is an additional amount of money. So in total, roughly about 2.5 million is what we're going to receive between the two of them for this year.
And for our purposes, we should not count on that for future years, to Chris's point. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what I was alluding to, as far as, there may be some changes in our tax, there may be some, ballot initiatives, and some of it's going to take a vote of the people. But as much as we can, I would remain conservative with the anticipation that some of this is going to reflect into next year and maybe possibly the year after in revenue streams. Okay, Vicki, can we go on? Does anybody else have any questions there? So just this is a brief look again, trying to clarify a little bit more on our reserves. And so what we came up with was just a line chart, and I can kind of just share this with you a little bit, and then we can answer some of those questions. But the blue line represents cash and investments, and that is more than just our fund balance. That's also it also reflects our liability. And our liability is our salaries and benefits that we always have to make sure that we set aside every month to make sure that everyone receives their income. So the trend is that number on that line declines about $1 million to $1.5 million a month for the first 8 months. And that drop between that 14 million to 6 million between July and February, that's just a reflection of not receiving property taxes. So as you can see, once we receive that money that comes in, we'll receive larger amounts, and then you can tell by that our fund balance as well as our cash and investments lines increase. The red line or pink line that you see there represents the accrued salaries and benefits. And at the end of August, the liability is completely paid off. So you can see that the fund balance line in August and the cash and investment line are the same, because we don't have any liability at that point. And then as we continue to set aside money to pay people across the rest of the remainder of the year, there's some increase between the fund balance line and the cash and investments line. So as the staff earns their pay, they start to accrue some of the pay that they'll get paid when they are not working. So as the liability grows throughout the year, the fund balance decreases, and that's reflected on the gray line. Really the main difference, again, I said, between the cash and investments line and the fund balance line is just that liability, and the gap grows as the year goes on because the liability increases. But even with the liability, Mr. Schwartz was asking, how much cash do we have that's just there that is not being used? And as we look at this chart, with all of the liability that we have, we still will never go below that $6 million. So there is a $6 million cushion all year that remains idle. Now that's part of our set aside as far as our policy that reflects a 16.67%.
I'm sorry, I lost Mr. Cruz. Can anyone hear him?
I lost him as well.
I lost him as well.
Kathy or Vicky, would you text him and let him know that we lost his audio?
Doing that right now.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a clarification question from Ron or Chris to comment on? So when I look at February, I guess that's 2020, can you effectively take the blue line at 6 million and subtract the Tabor reserve and count on that as an available cushion amount?
Well, you can, but then you're ignoring the accrual for payroll. So the gray line, which is just below 4 million, is the real net availability.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense.
Mr. Clausen, I got a note from Mr. Cruz saying he lost service. He's trying to reconnect. I can pinch hit for him while he's trying to come up online. Obviously, I think we shared with you the bulk of what this graph represents, but I'm sure there's more questions, so I'm happy to respond to any additional that are coming from you guys.
Well, thanks, Casey. I'm glad you stepped up to bat. Now I got some really good questions.
This also indicates the Major League Baseball's back on, right?
Well, let's go.
Yeah.
You tried to bring the heat, Mr. Taylor.
I was wondering when you ran your regression analysis, what is the variability of this forecast?
Tell them it's 2% and move on.
There you go. You got an answer. This is a pretty consistent year over year demonstration of what you can see in terms of the cash flow month to month. There are other ways to address cash flow issues if we run into them, but as you can see here, we typically don't run into many problems based on the health of our reserves, if you will.
Let's go to the next slide then, if there's no other questions. I think Teresa's question was spot on. What's the net there?
Yep. Well, I think that was essentially just calling it out to make sure that we were responding to that question that came up at our last work session. So if there's nothing else on the cash flow or the reserves, we can jump into what our recommendations are at this point and bring you toward next steps from a board action perspective. So our recommendations, and I believe we've discussed this in all of the weeks preceding, we are confident that maintaining a conservative final projection using our base funding formula is our best step going into the fall, recognizing that enrollment is still a variable. We are obviously prepared to look at our enrollment from a place of whether it's a small downtick or an uptick. We feel pretty confident it's going to come in pretty close to 6481. Obviously, there's a lot of questions circulating around our fall plan and so forth, so we'll continue to monitor that closely. But what we would recommend is that conservative approach, and then using a rolling budget scenario as we come into August and September, is revisit a few issues here, starting with our thoughts around staff compensation, if there's any room to address that. We are currently working off of a budget, as you know, that is based off of a salary freeze for all staff. We would also prioritize a restoration of funding for the K-5 literacy curriculum, includes the resources, the materials that would support that, as well as professional development. Keeping in mind that that would be a 2-year project, so we would not expect on spending everything that we need to in next year's budget, but over that 2-year period, restoring some of those funds back. And then also making sure that we're creating flexibilities for each of our school sites, responding to additional resources and those needs. As was called out earlier, CARES funds do help directly address any particular needs that we are going to experience as a result of COVID-19. And so we do have that being built into our fall plan as well, including a resource working group that's meeting to discuss everything from materials and supplies to the potential of additional staffing if we are finding a need for that as we come into the fall. Any questions on those recommendations?
Yeah, Casey, I have a clarification on the second point there under number 2. Is it a true restoration? Was there some funding for K-5 literacy that was halted and then it would be a re-up, or can you tell me how you're using the word restore?
Yeah, essentially it would be our initial plans for moving toward a K-5 curriculum adoption. So that $390,000 line item would be one of the first things that we would want to put back into the budget that was adjusted, because that was one of our line items that we identified as we were going through those reductions and adjustments.
So just to clarify, this is the same item that we talked about in the last 2 meetings?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I think that takes us to...
Wait, I have a question.
Oh, sure, sorry.
So I don't know how to ask this question. When we're looking at the staff compensation and we're freezing it for this year, how long would it take us to get back to, without obviously knowing, without having a crystal ball, do we have an idea of how long it would take us to unfreeze that and get back on track in the future?
I don't want to read too much into your question, Ms. Upchurch, but I think if you're asking if we were to have a freeze that extended all the way through next school year, how long would it take us to get back up to where we would be otherwise? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think we all feel the same way, that this just, when I saw that 3 million and it just puts a pit in my stomach. And the fact that we just unfroze our pay, got caught up, and now here we are again. It just...
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's distressing, certainly from the standpoint that we don't want to set ourselves any further back. I think the question really implies how much would we have anticipated being able to create as far as an increase for this upcoming school year. And Mr. Foster, if you're on the call, it might be helpful to provide a little bit of context here. What I would say is it's going to take about $3 million if we were to do a 1% compensation increase across the board for all staff. And that may be within our means as we think about next year. The other thing we do have to think about, though, is what the multi-year impact of this event may be. So if we do that, then what are the implications as we're going into 21-22 school year and beyond? So I think that is something that we will need to investigate more deeply as we come into the fall. And we're going to have to look at the cost benefit analysis of that. I think you're obviously going to hear from us that we would advocate for continuing to address the compensation needs that we would identify across all of our staff. But we understand the unique circumstances that we're in and how a lot of what we're going to do is going to be based on that context. So I think, Ms. Upchurch, it's hard to just put a set number on that. Anything that we can do as we go into next year will help us as we continue to go forward. And the longer you have a freeze, the longer it's hard to work your way out of. So I know there's some history to that. I don't know that we need to recap all that right now. But Mr. Foster, is there anything else that you would add to what has already been shared?
No, there's not a whole lot. I do appreciate that. You do dig yourself a hole with any type of freeze, and it takes some time to get out of that. So always careful about moving in that direction.
And then the other dynamic, Tiffany, each year the costs for the districts go up. So, you know, even if we want to essentially get our teachers back to where they were, the expenses for the district are going to be greater next year and the year after than they were this school year. So much like you, I am committed to our teachers, and I would like to do everything we can. And it's a valid question. It's a good question. But as Casey articulated, just a lot of moving parts. You know, if this economic downturn turns into a recession and it's a, you know, lengthy period of time. And so anyways, but, you know, I sincerely, as always, appreciate you thinking about our teachers and making that forefront of your analysis and what we could do to take care of them.
That also being said, Ms. Upchurch, you gave a good lead into the fact that that is part of what the motions will be in front of the board this evening in terms of adopting the salary schedules as presented, in addition to the formal adoption of our 2021 budget appropriations. And then finally, a third motion, which does authorize the potential of fund balance transfers only as needed. And that speaks to our cash flow issue that we were talking about before.
Dr. Summers, I'm back.
There you go, Mr. Cruz. There you are. How are you, sir?
Yes, I survived.
Back in the game.
Just back to that number 3, authorizing potential fund balance transfers. We didn't have to do that at all this year, but it's something that the board passed as a resolution last year, and it makes sense to do. We're not looking at borrowing from the state for any cash flow purposes. So we have the money in those other funds if we need to do that, but we also need your permission to do that if that's possible.
And before we make any motions, are there any specific questions regarding the language in the motions or any other aspects of the motions?
Actually, I have a question back on the second item on the previous slide, just in terms of clarification. Restoring the funding on the K-5 literacy program. Is that the SRD program that is in fact what we discussed on our last 2 working sessions, correct?
Yes, that would be inclusive of that reallocation.
So my concern is that the negative impact of doing that might be far greater than the safety factor of holding off on it. And I just want to validate a couple things before I ask my question to ensure that I have my facts correct.
Sure.
And these might be Dr. Benton or Mr. Foster questions. If they are, if you folks could please just validate, that would be great. So is my understanding right that in the last testing that 378 of our K-12 students tested under grade level for literacy?
I'm listening to Dr. Benton. She happens to be in the same location as I am. She says about 360. So yes, roughly that is an accurate number.
So of those that were tested, that represents over 33%.
25%.
Okay, and then I must have bad numbers here on this graph. Okay, so 1 in 4 of our kids are below grade level. And am I correct in understanding that number has increased since the last time the kids were tested by nearly 30%?
Yes. We
Okay.
do not have data from this most recent quarter or end of the year. So we don't know exactly what that looks like, but you might anticipate a similar trend, or even more.
Yeah, so we have a macro situation here. And am I correct in understanding that there's something important about being at grade level at third grade, as Dr. Benton explained in our session, I guess 6 weeks ago, where the balance of their peers tend to pull away from them and they're left behind?
That's one way to look at it. Obviously, that data point would suggest that students who are not reading at grade level by third grade do experience significant challenges as they work through the remainder of their school years.
Okay. So my data points are close or on track, it sounds like. So to Mr. Clausen's point about us being all about the kids' success, and making sure everybody has an equal shot and a fair opportunity, I'm wondering if we wouldn't want to reconsider that particular piece of funding, because we're already behind the 8 ball. There's a macro trend happening around us. And it's important that our staff's capacity to have in enhancing and increasing the literacy percentage of our kids as part of the school's system's DNA. It's important that we have that succinctly taken care of, funded, and allow the staff to execute on it. My understanding, it takes 1 to 3 years to get that done anyways. And if we're already behind the 8 ball and we choose to let it sit for potentially another 6 months, we are missing some fundamental things that are important to the core of what we do for a living here.
So I think it might be helpful, and I can allow Dr. Benton to speak to this a little bit more. I wouldn't want to create an impression that we're not going to be servicing our students' literacy needs at the beginning of next year if this is not factored into the budget. But I do think what's important in that is considering the timeline for what a K-5 literacy adoption involves. And so that really is the plan as it currently was proposed, or that was the timeline that we were on. And Dr. Benton can share a little bit more so you understand exactly what that process entails.
We will be reviewing and revising our curriculum regardless in terms of the K-5 literacy piece. It's just the reality that we won't be able to purchase the materials that we believe might be a good fit without reinstating this funding. So we'll still do everything we can within our power to train staff, to align to standards and all of that work. But we won't be able to purchase the resources or maximize the professional development dollars without that reinstated.
But isn't it fair to say if we don't aggressively go after this challenge, it's not going to get any better? And if it doesn't get any better, how do we go to our constituents and our owners and tell them that we've made a conscious decision not to invest deeply in trying to slay this large dragon? It's a quarter of the population. It is significant. And we don't want to dip into reserves for anything on a reoccurring basis, but this at least is one area where the return is quite significant, and it's a fundamental thing, part of what we do, is to ensure that our children are literate so that when they finish the 12 or 13-year program here, that they have a platform for success and the opportunity to choose versus not choose because they have a particular deficiency versus maybe some of their peers.
I would have to concur with Mr. Schwartz. I don't want to risk. I get that we do a great job in our district, but we also are an excellent district, and I would hate for us to let that rest on something that's that important. Each of our kids matter, and meeting and reaching and teaching them where there are. If we're shortchanging our staff or our students, I think it would be important to put that back in. But my question would be also, is it a recurring expense? And I don't know that this is something that can wait.
So in terms of expenses, we have a 5 to 7 year adoption cycle. So anything we put in front of you lasts on average 6 years. So it is ongoing in terms of there is recurring cost. The cost associated with the literacy adoption would be the ongoing training and professional development for new staff throughout that 6-year period. So after your initial purchase, it's what you have to do to train staff who might be new to your site, or if we have growth.
And in terms of percentage of the budget, those costs are in the 0.5% or less range on an annual basis. Is that correct?
They're much smaller, yes.
Okay. And the other thing I think that might be valuable for us to note is that our predecessors and Dr. Summer's staff and their predecessors have done a phenomenal job of always spending a little bit less than what's brought in. And so nobody wants to spend reserves unless we absolutely have to. But the good news is if we do dip into them, we also have a wonderful track record. And I would argue we make it part of the DNA of replenishing reserves well on an annual basis.
I kind of like the conversation, but do you guys have a suggested trade-off? Because, you know, this budget's been underway for a long time, and what I'm understanding here is this could be reinstated depending on head count or student count and the final PPOR. And so this, to me, I mean, maybe you list it number one as what would be restored. I don't know. But if you really want it back in the budget, then what are you going to take out? Because, you know, that's what resource allocation is all about. It's trade-offs. So do you guys have a suggested trade-off?
So if you're asking your fellow board members, I don't know the budget well enough to know what would be next in line. But I guess what I would say is if we need to use our reserves to fund literacy of our children, given that 1 out of 4 of all those kids are below grade level, and given that 3rd grade is a critical inflection point, that we fund it for the first year in its entirety. And then as we build our long range plan, we burn that into the plan and we don't have to do a diving catch again.
So Dr. Benton, can you confirm that 25% of our population in K through 5 are below reading capability?
So in K3, it's in 2019, we had about 360 students of about 1,500 assessed who were below grade level. So they're well below grade level or below grade level in reading.
That's K through 3, is that what you just said?
K through 3, correct.
And that trend is going the wrong direction.
Correct.
And does that boil out to be what Ron is saying, 25%?
Yes.
25% of our students are below grade level in reading by the time they reach the 3rd grade.
Actually, of the K through 3 students assessed in 2019, at the end of the year, 25% ended the year below or well below grade level in grades K.
Was 100% of them assessed?
Yes.
Okay.
So I guess
So
I need. Oh, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
I was just going to say I agree with Ron that it's, you know, it's the like Matt always says, it's all about the kids, and this one is an area that is troublesome.
I agree as well. It's troublesome. I need some clarification on recurring costs versus one-time costs. So Dr. Benton, and I hear you, it almost sounds like it's a recurring cost every 5 to 7 years. Is that as I understand it?
Correct, for any adoption. So any adoption that's brought in front of you typically averages about a 6-year adoption cycle.
So, and it's just an open question to my fellow board members, could we consider it a one-time cost for this particular program for the next 6 years to implement or help Dr. Benton restore that? And is that a thoughtful, good use of our reserves? Do other people have a say in that?
I understood that a little differently. I understood that there's an acquisition of the curriculum, but then the ongoing costs are training, development of our staff to be able to utilize that curriculum. So there's two parts to this cost, if I understand it right. There's the cost of the curriculum itself, which may be whenever you adopt new curriculum. It could be a 5 to 7 year window, but then there's annual costs for professional development, which is for, to make sure that our staff can utilize it well.
Dr. Benton, could we trouble you to give us some round numbers?
A typical adoption is about $50,000 per grade level for the 6 year. So when you think about a K-5 adoption, you're looking at about $300,000. You're also looking at professional development that we would want to add to this. There is professional development that comes with the curriculum, but then there's also professional development related to specific deficits. Areas where we want to focus our attention include phonics and phonics instruction, as well as intervention. And so that's an additional $50,000 for upfront cost. And then we also want to build in additional training and support and resources for special populations. So we have teachers who are not just reading interventionists, but also special educators, gifted educators, EL facilitators, any of the people who might be working with our students in other settings and need access to the curriculum and the training. So that we are ballparking that about an additional $100,000, so a total of $450,000 across 2 years.
And following that, would there be a reoccurring cost if it's a 6 or 7 year cycle? Would there be reoccurring costs in years 3 through 6?
The only reoccurring cost would be for keeping or maintaining the training for new staff. So when we bring on new staff, we need to train them within the particular curriculum resource and phonics as well as intervention instruction.
Is that under $100,000 on an annual basis for years?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Dr. Benton, you probably heard me say this more than once. I'm a firm believer that you always need to hope for the best, plan for the worst. And, obviously things are looking a little more promising than they did during our May board meeting. But, I'm concerned regarding, I guess, the status of our kids, that they're not progressing as quickly as they should, and that they're beyond grade level. But I'm also concerned about overextending ourselves, especially not knowing how much money we will be receiving based on PPOR in the fall. So if we did wait, a few months, what, if any, effect would that have other than, being delayed and rolling it out to our teachers?
I think any time that we work on professional development, training, analysis of standards and assessment, when we do that work and we don't know whether or not we can actually purchase resources or training, it can be limiting to the amount we can actually get done.
Okay.
So if we wait too long into the school year to make a decision of whether or not to add this back, we lose the momentum and we lose the investment.
Okay. So with that being said, Dr. Benton, we have limited resource, and at least I, as one board member, have gone on the record as far as how much I'm prepared to approve for from our reserves. If it came down to larger classrooms and this new curriculum, or smaller classrooms similar to what we have now, and maybe postponing the curriculum, what would your recommendation be?
Well, I don't believe that it's my job to make that choice.
Oh, but I'm asking for your recommendation.
What I would tell you is we have phenomenal educators. They work tirelessly to try and help students learn to read. So it's not a lack of effort on their part, it's a lack of resources and training. And I think most teachers would tell you, if I have 22 students in the class and a fourth of them aren't reading at grade level, versus having 23 students in a class, and I have the resources needed to make sure that as many of them as possible can hit grade level, that's more empowering for a teacher. But I can't answer a question about offsetting class size or literacy resources.
Okay, appreciate that, Dr. Benton. Dr. Summers, what are your thoughts regarding this topic?
Number one, I appreciate the level of attention that this need is receiving. I'm not sure that I guess what I would look at from the board's perspective, if this is a priority, which we do see it as one in the district, and certainly we can talk all night long about the fact that we want to make sure that our teachers and students have access to the best quality materials and resources. I think we have the ability within our budget right now to be able to make that commitment. If you all are willing to approve an additional spend down of the reserves, then that would be a resolution that we would also need to see approved tonight. If you wish to wait into the fall, as Dr. Benton pointed out, I think we're on a very tight timeline as we're coming back into the beginning of the year. So I can see it from both angles. This is a need that we do need to address at some point. It would be best to do it sooner rather than later.
May I ask one other question?
Of course.
That's probably a Dr. Benton question, but whoever on the staff is best qualified, please feel free to answer. With respect for Mr. Clausen's points, this challenge seems to be mounting and growing on a consistent basis. The data and the graphs that I'm looking at that are our district's test scores indicated over the problem itself has grown by 31% in 4 years. So it's moving in the wrong direction on a relatively steep pace. So my question is, when would have been the right day, the right month, or the right school year to begin attacking this challenge?
Well, Ron, can I address that? It was probably 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. It should have been done, obviously. But that's not going to help us make the decision tonight. I'm sorry.
Well,
we have to decide tonight whether or not we're willing to dip into reserves to cover what I heard was about 250,000 or 225,000. What was the exact number we're talking about here?
Over 2 years, it is 400.
Well, in this budget, it's roughly half, is it not? Or
yes,
is it
that's
more
correct.
In the first year,
I think about 225 is what we would identify for this upcoming budget year.
And so if we went back up to the slide that showed the net that we're taking out of reserves, then as I recall, it's a little higher. There we go. Yeah. So instead of 1.5, it's going to be 1.725. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And I think that's within the boundaries that Matt had previously expressed, but I'll let him speak to that.
Well, and that's an accurate assessment, Chris, but during your board member comments, you also mentioned you want to bring up security modifications or improvements, and I just see our reserves going down and down. I do think we need to be very judicious in how much money we pull out. So, if we had more resources, it would be an easier decision, but that's what I'm struggling with.
I understand, and I appreciate what you just said, because I was going to bring that up as well. We're talking here the operating budget. The budget I'm talking about would be the capital reserves, and so we would not be taking vestibules or security issues out of the operating budget. That'll come out of the capital budget. And we don't even know what the amount is, but I definitely want to pursue it. It's just a different budget. Okay. Agreed, David?
I think Mr. Cruz is.
Yeah, I'm here.
Issues. Oh, he's back. Okay.
Yeah, I'm in and out.
So if we were to look at the entranceways of these schools and really wanted to improve the security and include in that security the ability to monitor health to the degree it's possible, that would be a capital expenditure, correct? It wouldn't be in this operating budget.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
So Matt, that's what I thought it was, and I understand those are still reserves. I know that, but I don't want to conflate the two.
well, and I appreciate that, Chris. But the bottom line is, if there's catastrophic failure with one of our boilers or our HVAC system, and we no longer have the money in our reserves for infrastructure, the money's going to have to come someplace. So, I understand the dynamics with the two different accounts. And another dynamic is you're talking about equipment, and if I understood you correctly, that would monitor temperature and so forth. I really know nothing about that. And I would presume that would also entail some type of regular maintenance or fees. So, those are my concerns. And my number is 3 million, irrespective of what reserve account it comes from.
Yeah,
Well, we don't know the cost of what I'm suggesting. I think I know the benefit to the school district and to the kids and to what we really put forth first. I just think that this issue that Ron has raised, and I think it's legit, and I don't think if we can bite the bullet on it, because again, what we're looking at is worst case budget. So, we already know based on some of the things that's been passed in the legislature and what's coming down, that it looks like instead of a 12% cut, it's going to be more like 6%. And this is core to why we have a school system. And I just have a real problem ignoring it. So, Ron, thank you for bringing it to our attention and hitting on it so hard, because I don't think it's something that we should cut, frankly.
Yeah, I concur. And just one other comment. Thank you for jumping in and clarifying, by the way. The reason I wanted to go backwards in time is this animal's getting bigger and scarier on a bi-semester basis. And we're already behind the 8 ball. And the farther we kick the can down the road, the worse it gets. We espouse ourselves as being a very high quality, high performing school system. And 1 out of 4 kids, K through 3 under grade level, is not high quality. So we need to show the fortitude, step forward, empower our team to be successful, and get back to the place to where almost every kid has a chance to be as literate as he or she chooses and can graduate with the choices that they deserve when they're out of high school.
And Chris, Ron, just so we're clear, we're all on the same page. My only concern is where the money's going to come from. So I'm hearing from my fellow board members that they're prepared to approve a resolution to pull money out of the reserves. I will support it, but I am going on the record that we don't know how next year is going to pan out or the year after. We don't know if this coronavirus, how many iterations we'll go through. We don't know if the recovery is going to be a L or a V. There's just a lot of variables. And the one constant thing I heard from the board members that served during the last recession was they didn't come back enough early enough. And I'm just reminding this board of that. And with that being said, if there's any more discussion on this topic, we could listen to it or we could move on.
So we can move on, but can I ask one quick question also? If instead of kicking the can down the road, if we end up in a situation where we do need to save and pinch more in the future because we don't know, I agree with you, Matt. And I also agree with having the fiduciary responsibility to make sure that we're taking care of our district. It would seem like it'd be more feasible to not leave our kids behind now, and if we have to find someplace else to cut in the future, to make sure that we keep those reserves where we need to be, that would be the more responsible thing to do. So I am also prepared to vote yes on a resolution to make sure that stays, that the money stays in the classroom for the kids.
Okay. And then I guess there's one other component. We typically have 2 readings of a resolution. So we need to discuss if we are prepared to vote on it, or if we want to consider tonight our first reading and maybe have a quick Zoom meeting latter part of this week or first part of next week. I'd appreciate the board members' input on that topic.
I'd be fine with a reading tonight and a follow-up reading. I just wanted to add to the discussion that I think it might be worth conversing, maybe not necessarily tonight, but at a future meeting on it as an agenda item about, what our sweet spot is for reserves. What do we as a board want to retain as a reserve percentage or a window of percentage, whether it's between 4 and 12% or up to 16, something like that. And then also with that, how could we write a resolution as to how we will be replenishing reserves in the future as we are able? I think those two things could help clarify a policy of reserve for the board and for the district, so that things are just a bit more predictable, and we don't feel like we're in this, the situation we're in right now that feels a little bit uncomfortable to me personally.
Well, and I appreciate that, Teresa. And but the problem is, we could write resolutions, but until we know what the funding is going to look like, how many kids are going to be in our classroom, it's just kind of a hard guess. And, we could also talk about percentages, but until we know exactly how long the economic downturn is going to last, that's one of the reasons why I'm holding firm to a specific amount of money, not necessarily a percentage, just anticipating that this is going to last longer than perhaps some individuals may think.
And Matt, let me just add too that the capital expenditure, I don't know that we'd necessarily have to take that out of reserves. Isn't it possible that we could borrow that money like a COP and treat it as a capital project? I don't know what the numbers are. I mean, I think we need to look at it, but I'm not convinced in my mind that it's an automatic assumption that's coming out of reserves.
Well, and I appreciate that, Chris. And you're probably aware of this. The district did some COPs previously. And if we're looking at reduced revenue, so to speak, from Denver, and we have increased costs through a payment and interest on a COP, I'm not sure that's going to get us where we want to be. If anything, it might put us in a better or worse situation than we might have been if we didn't pull the money out of the reserves.
I'm not sure how you do that calculation, but I understand what you just said.
Okay.
So
if I don't have to pull $2 million out of reserves and I have a $250,000 payment per year, I don't see how my reserve situation is worsened. But again, I want the admin to actually come back with information. That's what I'm asking for, because I want to have a normal school life for kids. And I believe what we have to do that is try and prevent sickness from entering the building. Now, I don't know what other solutions you all have, but that to me is a pretty high priority.
Well, and I think we're all on the same page there as well, Chris. So just so I'm clear, you're talking about a security vestibule that would have some technology that would also monitor temperatures, or are you envisioning someone that would actually be there with a scanner taking everyone's temperature going in? I just want to make sure
I certainly hope we're not incurring additional personnel costs. No, I'm more of the opinion that I walk through screeners all the time and they buzz or they take it needs to be monitored. But I think there's electronic capabilities of doing that. I don't know that it requires staff. I'm hopeful that it would not.
Okay, that's fair. I appreciate the clarification.
So one other item, I mean, I think Teresa's point is valid. We now that we understand the net cash worth of the district, I would concur it's valuable for us to have a separate conversation with respect to reserves. And Matt's right. There are events outside of our control that happen all the time. Nobody planned on 9/11. Nobody planned on COVID. Nobody planned on the Great Recession. And every year we go into, those variables will always be in front of us and exist and be beyond our control. But what is it in our control we should act on? execute on, and continue to provide a platform for our kids to be successful. So I'd recommend we move forward on the resolution for the literacy program, and that we move swiftly to determine if what Chris proposed is feasible as well, and then figure out not should we do it, but how should we do it.
Okay, that's fair. So let's take these one at a time. So for purposes of the literacy program, do we essentially, do you want to make a motion, a proposed resolution, Ron, and we can fine tune it for a second reading, either latter part of this week or first part of next week?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Do you want me to attempt to articulate it?
Yeah, you don't have to worry about any of the whereas, just get down to the nuts and bolts, and then we'll fine tune it a little bit.
The nuts and bolts was we should provide the funding out of reserves into the upcoming budget to enable the team to move forward with the K-5 literacy program in year one. And if there's capital funds required for the curriculum in year one, that we fund that additionally.
And Dr. Benton, I have several numbers written down. What number would that be?
If you're doing it over 2 years' time, it would be $225,000 for this year, and then $225,000 the following year.
Okay. Is that what you would like to add in there, Mr. Schwartz?
Dr. Benton, will that allow you to do a quality job and begin showing results within the 1 to 3 year window that you mentioned to me previously?
That's the intent.
Okay. And are you comfortable committing to those results?
Yeah.
Was that a yes? Okay, thank you. Yeah, then yes, my answer, Matt, is correct.
Okay. Do we want to take a moment to look at our schedules and figure out when we could reconvene to vote on the resolution for the second reading, or we would like to do that remotely with Kathy's assistance?
Hey, let's do it now while we're all together.
All right, perfect. All right, just bear with me, please.
I assume we do this before the end of the calendar month, yeah?
About this week?
This week is a little dicey for me in the evenings. Does the 29th, which is Monday, does that work for everyone?
Good for me.
Mr. Taylor, is that too far out for you, sir?
No, that works. The 29th works.
Okay. Ms. Upchurch and Ms. Phillips?
Is it evening time you're looking at, Matt?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm open.
Okay, 6 p.m. Does that work for everyone? Okay,
I'm good.
Perfect.
Yep.
Ms. Namika, would you take care of the appropriate notification? Mr. Foster, can I task you to prepare a draft of the resolution, and if we could maybe have it done by Wednesday, if that's not asking too much, and I'd love to get it circulated amongst the board members, then hopefully out to the public first thing Thursday morning.
No problem.
Yeah,
Certainly.
Thank you. All right, any other comments, concerns on this topic before we move on? Okay, we have 3 motions in front of us that I will read, but before I do so, we kind of got sidetracked. Is there anything that we need to change or discuss on these motions?
Matt, I can't, I'm not technically advanced enough to find them, I don't think.
Okay, so they're on section D1.
Yeah,
so if you just,
it can't get out of the Zoom view.
okay, do you have access to pull up board docs? Because you could minimize Zoom and pull up board docs, and we should still be able to see you and hear you.
Matt, you have a second career as a tech support analyst.
Learning a few tips from you, Ron.
I got it.
Okay. All right. So Are we good if I go ahead and read these one at a time? Okay, perfect. Recommended motion number 1. I move that the Board of Education adopt the 2021 salary schedules and supplementary salary schedules for all employees and employee groups as presented this evening with the following additional clarifications and actions. Due to budgetary constraints, it is necessary that these schedules and all related pay schedules, including co-curricular schedules and rates, be the same for the 2021 fiscal school year as they were for the 2019, and I believe that's a typo, it should say 2020 fiscal year. To the extent that any provision contained within the board operational policies or employee handbooks may be inconsistent with the above action by the board, including without limitation policies GCBA, GCBA-R, GCBC, GCBC-E-1 and E2, GDBA, GDBC, and DBD. Those provisions within those policies and handbooks are suspended and shall no longer be in effect until further action by the board.
Second.
Okay. Questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Hearing none, Ms. Namika?
Clausen,
Aye.
Ms. Phillips,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Aye.
All right, the second motion, be it resolved that by the Board of Education of the Lewis Palmer District number 38 in El Paso County, State of Colorado, in accordance with CRS 22-44-105, that the 2021 annual budget be adopted and that the amounts shown in the resolution attached to the minutes of this meeting be appropriated to each fund as specified in the adopted budget for the ensuing fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2020 and ending on June 30th, 2021.
Quick question of procedure on this one, please.
Yes, sir.
Given our discussion and then our rereading of the resolution on Monday, I assume that piece would simply be an addendum?
It would be a separate resolution.
Okay, and it would just feed straight into that budget as well?
Correct.
Thank you.
That's my understanding. Mr. Foster, is that consistent with your understanding, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you both.
Great
Just
question, Ron.
a comment or a question as well on the appropriation resolution. Is there, this looks different to me and I may not be remembering from years past, but is there anything different on this appropriation resolution other than the numbers, but the way that it's written that we should be more aware of given the change in budget this year?
Mr. Cruz or Dr. Summers, I believe that's a question for you.
Short answer is no.
Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a second to the motion?
Second.
Okay. Any additional questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Hearing none, Ms. Namika?
Mr. Clausen,
Aye.
Ms. Phillips,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, recommended motion number 3, be it resolved that the Board of Education of Lewis Palmer School District 38 authorizes the superintendent or his/her designee to borrow available unencumbered cash balances, the capital reserve, insurance reserve, building reserve, and nutritional food service fund in accordance with CRS 22-44-113 be used for short-term cash needs of the district during the fiscal 2021, it should say school year, and it be further resolved that the funding for incomplete capital reserve fund projects be carried forward to the fiscal year 2021.
Second.
Questions, comments, concerns?
I have a question. Can we lay that out in layman terms?
Basically, if we needed cash in our general fund, we could borrow it from these other funds if we needed to do that. We haven't needed to do that, but in the event that we had a shortfall of cash, this is one way that we could address that shortfall.
And if I
And further,
understand correctly,
Tiffany, in the past, if you have a project that's ongoing, that's June, July, and August to get done, all we're doing is just authorizing the use of funds for that crossover period of time. They do, and this is very much the same resolution as I've seen now for the third time.
Sure, I understand. I figured this. I understand that this is standard operating procedure and that it's just dotting I's and crossing T's. But when you read it, I thought, wonder how easy it is for others to understand what we just are voting on.
So for future reference, would you like us to play with the language a little bit down the road?
No, I just wanted to make sure it was explained what we're voting on.
Okay.
I get it.
I appreciate that. Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, Ms. Namika?
Mr. Clausen,
Aye.
Ms. Phillips,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Aye.
All right, Dr. Benton,
you, Board.
you're next. Thank you. Dr. Benton, you're next on the agenda for remote learning recap.
So we should have a PowerPoint presentation that's being pulled up. And I have two people with me to help present. I have Suzanne McGarrico and Devon Johnson, two of our teammates who helped launch remote learning in the district. So you can scroll to the next. What we want to do is just quickly review what is remote learning. What are some of the examples that students experienced during the remote learning timeframe? What did we do well? And what do we still need to plan for? We also will take questions. So the work that you're going to see that's provided as samples actually came about because we asked our staff to do something completely different. We asked them to take what they normally would do in a brick and mortar setting and make it available for students in a remote learning setting. Well, normally we have a 2-day end of year summer learning academy where our teachers get together and learn from and with each other. Well, we weren't able to do that this year. So we decided to do the same exact thing that we asked our students to do. We had our teachers do it. And so they captured what they learned while they were trying to launch remote learning. And they were able to earn credit or stipend as though they were part of our traditional summer learning academy. We had 190 staff members take advantage of this opportunity. And we were moved by what they shared with us. So in general, what is remote learning? Our main focus during the entire remote learning timeframe, March through May, was a focus on staying connected with students and trying to continue the learning that they had been working on all year long. The benefit of launching into remote learning in March is that our teachers had already had the opportunity to establish cultures and routines and expectations with students. And so we wanted to maximize the connection part and make sure that our students felt like they were well taken care of and still part of a classroom community. You can scroll down. So this does align to our strategic plan. The major goal that this work aligns to is ensuring high quality instruction and relevant educational experiences for all students. And you can see the general alignment there. We do believe educating the whole child is our primary purpose, which allows you to see the connection to why maintaining student connections was so important to us. Our responsive teaching and learning environments was very reflected in remote learning because our teachers are constantly responding to feedback from both students and families. We also tried to focus on high quality instructional practices. We know that we have a lot to learn about launching remote learning, but we feel like our teachers grew tremendously in their ability to provide a digital or virtual education. We also know that we need to embrace innovation. And although no one wanted to be launched into innovation overnight, we do feel like our staff and our students and our families were able to find innovative ways to connect and learn. And we continue to basically cultivate multiple pathways towards our post-secondary success, and we shared some of those options with you a couple months ago.
Okay, I'll jump in here. This is Suzanne McGarrico, and it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Devon and I, who will be sharing the rest of this, or some of the rest of this presentation, had the honor really of reading through many portfolios that were submitted. And I wanted to share a few just to give you a flavor of what remote learning was like. And a lot of times when we envision remote learning, the first image that pops into our minds is a child or a young adult looking at a device. But I want you to know that really many of the teachers tried to balance their lessons and their assignments so that at least some of the time students were not in front of a device, but accomplishing tasks away from screens. And here I'm showing a couple of examples. One is simply math, and there were many students who took home their math workbooks, and so while they were getting instruction from online, they would then have something in front of them, paper and pencil wise, that they could actually do. And in place of manipulatives, you can see there it looks like it might be Fruit Loops, but we used what we had at home. The other image there is from Project Lead the Way. And so students, of course, that's a very hands-on type of course at the high school level. And they were designing, and they might have been using their technology, but ultimately they were building with their hands from whatever supplies they might have had at home. So just to let you know that we were engaging both on and off the computer. If you could go on to the next slide. Here, I know we've spent a lot of time talking about reading tonight, and this is an example of what an online type of reading would have been in remote learning, where the instruction was given by the teacher. In this case, the level is kindergarten. And these kindergartners would listen to their teacher, give a lesson, show what it was that she was trying to get them to learn. In this particular case, these kindergartners were learning their sounds and putting together 3-letter words to be able to pronounce those. She would have them practice that. And then on the other side of the slide, you can see little students who had been videoed probably by their parents using a cell phone in this case, and they would practice and then actually show and submit what their reading was like. And this was a way that the teacher could then, of course, get feedback and be able to prompt them again to, maybe practice something more, or to give them some positive feedback and encouragement. So that is an example of reading instruction. In the next slide, there are just lots of a smattering of what math and science could have looked like. It was obviously very different depending on the grade level, depending on the teacher. But you can see that in the one case is some simplistic examples of multiplying by 2 digits, and it's a teacher. In most cases, the math teachers, by the way, were using a document camera, and so you didn't necessarily see them, but you heard their voice, and it's their hand that was writing and showing, just as they would in the classroom on a board. So you can see that on the one hand, and on the other hand, you can see something more advanced in probably algebra, where again, you can see the teacher's pen and she's explaining it. Still though, some hands-on. So there was some science lessons that were going on with young students, and they were actually producing something from that. And there were choice boards and all kinds of ways that students were learning math and science remotely. The next slide shows us the most advanced math class I think that we have in our district. It's differential equations. This is Kathy Thurkel and a small group of students who were going to take an authentic assessment. The way they would do that is collaboratively. So they were going to break off into Zoom groups and actually do a final examination this way. So it was a very unique way for us to do this, but Kathy Thurkel and the students really enjoyed this type of learning and a different way of showing their learning. In the next slide, for something completely different, it was music and art. And music, I would have to say, was probably pretty challenging for many of the teachers to try to teach remotely. And I hear maybe some people like Teresa Phillips could probably agree to that. But what we see here are many ways that even conducting, they would do one-on-one lessons, and then they would try to do something all together. something that you need to know is when you see all of those students together in one virtual band, they're not actually hearing each other. They're actually listening to a recording, possibly following a video of a conductor, and then just playing by themselves. So they never actually get that feel of being together in a band or orchestra. It sounds really cool in the end, but it's through a lot of technology that happens. And it takes many, many hours for teachers to do that for the final outcome. Really neat to see this picture in the middle, isn't it? The Getty Museum Challenge had students recreating a work of art using objects in their own home. And then down in the corner was a teacher who actually showed how to, if you didn't have paint at home, she showed you how to mix coffee into water or some sort of different spices like cumin, and then create paint out of that. So there was so much ingenuity going on that was just neat to be able to see that. I'm handing it off over to Devon next.
All right, thank you, Suzanne. This is Devon Johnson. I'm excited to piggyback off of what Suzanne had to say. So in addition to the academics, we know our teachers are certainly aware that there were a lot of social emotional needs that needed to be met during this time. You'll see a quick snapshot here of a teacher and her picture with her bear. And this is just an example showing us of what teachers did and the extent of what they did to try to connect with students, whether that was sharing their favorite animals at the elementary level, bringing their pets to school. I heard many of them got to see pets on a regular basis, writing postcards to students, sending personalized videos with feedback, all of which were things that were, I think, going on a daily basis with students. Next slide, please. Along with those same lines comes engagement, a very difficult thing to do at times with remote learning. What was exciting to see is, I think during this time, there was actually an increase in school spirit and opportunities for that. We saw all kinds of spirit days, from hat day to crazy hair day to movie star day, and on and on and on. And one of my favorite things that I heard from teachers, I had a teacher make the comment, I've never had such an opportunity to gain insight into my students and their families, to actually be a part of their home and to see where they're coming from. And that was really exciting, I think, for teachers to get to see. In addition, there were a lot of passion projects and all kinds of other things that students were given as opportunities to grow and just to engage and connect with their teachers. On the next slide, I would like to highlight a few things that went well. And I will have to tell you, there were numerous things that our teachers were doing well with. But a couple that really stand out were options to engage and connect with students. Flexibility for kids and parents, that came up multiple times in the reflections from teachers of how important that was. Not just for schedules, but for pacing and for students to be able to get help in their classes as they needed. Students craving live attention time with their teachers, and actually that face-to-face interaction was really important during that time, and our teachers did a great job with that. And then, like I said, sharing their homes and just kind of what their daily life was like was another important factor that came into play over and over again in our feedback from teachers. On the next slide, when it says, what did we do well? I want to just piggyback and say that a couple things that stood out for me. This was an opportunity for teachers to grow and to learn. And we had several teachers who said that they learned programs and tools that we may or may not have had in place for a while, but they finally had the time to investigate and learn some of those programs. They didn't often have the time in the past or felt it was an urgent need. And this kind of gave them that little bit of a push that they needed to investigate some of those things. And many, many of them have some of these tools that they will take back with them if we go back to brick and mortar as well. Our teachers striving for a sense of community and pride was huge. You'll see there's a note here from our Gateway to Tech teacher talking about how important that was at the middle school level, and I believe at all levels. This time was a great opportunity for teachers to focus on essential learning and what was most important, and to think about the standards put out from the state and what's our priority with students. So we spent a lot of time thinking about that. And it might surprise you, but we actually had several teachers comment on how many of their students really loved the remote environment and how many of them thrived with that opportunity to be a little bit more self-paced and self-guided. And so there were some positives that came out of that as well. And so on that note, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Benton.
So we still have some things that we plan for. We know that we were given a lot of grace by the community and by students as we implemented something that was a heavy lift. for all of us. But what we have learned, we did ask several of our teachers in some focus group questions, you know, if we had to do this all over again, what would you do differently? What would you carry forward with you into next school year, regardless of how we return? And we know we need to plan for continued community building and relationships. As I said in the beginning, we had the luxury of 3/4 of the year with our students. And as we plan for the fall return, we know that we need to be even more intentional about how we build community within our classrooms and our sites so that we have relationships with our students. We know our students and their families to be able to leverage learning. We need to make sure we plan for student voice and connection to the school and the classroom. We heard from students and families that they want to make sure that they have choice and voice in their learning. And so we need to continue to plan for that. We also know that we need to continue to focus on digital citizenship and norms in a digital environment. That although we have it embedded within our curriculum, K-12, we know that a focus when you're constantly online and constantly potentially in Zoom Doom meetings or in Google Meets, Hangouts, that we need to make sure students know how to behave. And we got to see some pretty cool norms that were established even at the K1 and 2 level so that students could access and see each other. We know we need to work on consistent communication with families and students. That one of the frustrations of families, especially those who had multiple students at different levels, that they were getting bombarded by different communication systems and mechanisms. And we know we need to make sure that we're more concise and clear. We need to plan for our special populations. We know that one size does not fit all. And as we said before, we were all put into remote learning very quickly. Our special educators and our gifted facilitators and our EL facilitators, our reading interventionists worked tirelessly to try and meet the needs of our students. But we know that we, with more time, can focus on how to more intentionally meet students' needs. We know we need to maximize our schedules for student success. And what we mean by that is we want to make sure that anything that we schedule as a school but with teachers, that we're not stepping over each other's toes, that we honor each other's time, and everyone understands the expectation of time that should be invested in student learning. We need to work on common platforms and systems by level. Again, that continuity piece for parents and students, as well as for educators. We have different LMS or learning management systems available, and we need to make sure that we have some continuity and an expectation of what those systems look like and what students are expected to do with them. And we also know that we need to continue to refine how we provide feedback as well as plan for grading and accountability if we end up in another environment of remote learning. Grading and accountability are a stretch when you're just beginning to deliver instruction online. But now that we've had more time to thoughtfully plan and prepare, our hope is that we have a very solid grading and accountability policy and procedure for our teaching staff so that our students know exactly what's expected of them and how they'll be held accountable to their learning. And if you just scroll down one more. I also just want to quickly thank Michelle Jewell and Jess McAllister and Michael Brom and Annette Bass, as well as Suzanne and Devon and all the folks at the sites who made this work. But for the learning services team, there were some long weeks and some long and high investment on our end to make sure that our teachers and our students and our families had access. So I just want to publicly shout out the learning services team. You guys have any questions of us?
I guess I'll just start with a few comments. I have heard that a lot of grace was given on both ends, both the students, for the teachers trying to get up to speed so quickly, and then, but also reciprocated from the teaching angle of trying to stay in contact with students, or how do you reach a student who hasn't taken the initiative and gotten online? That seemed to be a trickier question because, and I know that teachers were making phone calls and whatnot to connect with some of those students, but in the end it seemed like there was some, I'm not sure that what the correct term would be, but some attrition where some students just weren't really ever engaged this spring. Is that an accurate statement? Are there?
I mean, yes, we had some students who, for whatever reason, had barriers to be able to access their education. And so what we did, we actually put together a process at each site to be able to work with families, to work with any other support personnel that we had in the building to try and make sure that students had access. We even had administrators trying to text students to say, hey, what do you need? What can we do? What can we help you with? And again, our main task was to make sure that we stayed connected with our kids. Our secondary task was the continuity of learning, which is one reason why grades were not necessarily impacted by the immediate shift to remote learning. The MTSS process, though, that each site tried to deploy to make sure that students were connected, we were able to stay connected with almost every single kid. But no, we could not reach every single student.
Right. And I wasn't trying to point out faults. I was just trying to think of, when we talk about taking care of every child. And the other aspect that caused me to pause earlier in hearing some teachers, and this was probably 6 or 8 weeks ago, was that it will be a very different scenario going from where we were in March, where all of a sudden we went from completely in person to completely remote, to say this fall, if we were to start school and then have to pull back, go remote, and then restart again. Can you speak to some of the, how do you pivot? How do you anticipate ingraining some agility that way in terms of a remote possibility that could either come and go, or that might be some sort of hybrid?
So not to jump the gun on the plan, because some of that will be addressed in the plan, but the instructional core and social emotional learning work group is actually working on a 2-phase implementation plan. And the first one is a plan to return to brick and mortar. And part of that includes what do we need to do to make sure that families and students and teachers are ready to go in case that we can be more agile in how we switch to remote learning, if in fact we need to do that. And that it would be site dependent, depending on how we're expected to respond based on the health department. The secondary phase of that implementation plan is the actual plan for remote learning, which will come with expectations for families, for students, for teachers, for support staff, all of the pieces that go into that, including technology, access, Wi-Fi, all of those pieces.
Can I piggyback on that last question?
Sure.
Yeah, so in all that you've learned and the plans that you have coming up, is it possible that the concept of a snow day could just become a remote learning day in the future? And if so, would that change our calendar year for school and so forth? Because there are some schools that do have off-site learning capabilities, and it's generally some sort of remote learning. Are we better prepared to move in that direction? And is that even a thought process that you've considered?
Yes, we have considered it. Yes, we've looked into it. Yes, we need more time to apply for that. That's a separate application process to be considered an e-learning district for utilization for those days. But the good news is the state is allowing for additional flexibility for calendar and for days this year for remote learning, should we need it in response to COVID-19, not necessarily in response to snow days, but there is greater flexibility that the state's allowing for what we would call traditional attendance requirements. We are looking at the potential of taking everything that we've developed and everything that we've learned and then applying for an e-learning status, but it would be effective the following school year.
I have a question, if we still have a quick moment. So for all the wrong reasons, you and your team have done all the right things. So thank you for what you've done for our kids and our community during very harsh and dramatic circumstances. And the great news is we are forced to move into the 21st century with our education system, which is wonderful. And we're in a position now where for the first time ever, we have the beginnings of a foundation to start providing choice. And the world is moving with or without that, so it's wonderful we're moving that direction. Having said all that, there's all kinds of standards and minimum requirements that you and your team are required to meet in the educational process. Based on what you know so far, how long will it take for you to get your hands around how easy or hard that is to do on a remote? A remote's really a wrong term. It means far away. On a net internet basis versus a live in the same room basis. And how easy or hard do you think that's going to be to make sure we provide equal or better quality results on behalf of the kids going forward? And results should be measured by the kids' ability to both absorb and retain and feel confident and good about what they have in their platform for success as adults.
So again, not to do too much forward conversation around what's going to be presented next, but we are capable. We currently have the capability to be able to offer online coursework for our secondary students, and we are in the process of developing online elementary programming that allows for a continuity of learning for students in an online platform. So we've taken a lot of what we already do know about those. Our secondary programs to be able to hopefully launch a successful elementary program for K-6. And the rest of your question is pretty big picture. So I don't know if I can answer it adequately. You're muted.
I said there's a degree of risk that goes with any step forward, but at the end of the day, this is bigger than we are. It's happening. It's not going to stop. There's 8 good things for every 1 or 2 bad things that come with it. What I'm just trying to help us get our arms around is how do we maximize the good and minimize the bad, and how do we keep the momentum of wonderful results going so that we can enhance the quality of education the district provides.
We continue to take the lessons that we learned from this spring. We continue to utilize the resources that we've been purchasing that do have digital components, so not to say remote, but more digital, and to be able to increase the level of rigor. So that's another key piece of what we hope to do in the fall as we plan for what we would call remote learning, but any kind of online learning. It does force you to boil everything down to what's essential. And it tends to be more project-based. It tends to be more outcome-driven in that manner. We have, like I said, still a lot to learn in that area, but the exciting part is that we're all excited to learn about it. And we're excited to try and figure out if this is something that we can successfully do together.
Yeah. Well, we're all proud of the work you're doing, and I think increasing the rigor was probably what I was looking for in terms of what's the lever you pull, how do you measure it, and what gives you the chance to make adjustments.
Well, there is ongoing monitoring that happens with any online program. So if that's, I mean, we do know though that we have to increase the rigor and make sure we can get to critical thinking, which was something that we did. That was a stretch for some of our quick implementation with remote learning that we hope to make sure that we can address in the fall.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Ladies, I just want to compliment you on the wonderful job that you've done, both with this presentation and the challenges that we experienced due to COVID-19. You know, quite frankly, it's remarkable, in my opinion, how good things turned out for our students and how many positive comments. So thank you for your time and dedication and everything you do for our kids.
Thanks to Suzanne and Devon for sharing their evening with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Suzanne, please give John our best, okay?
I sure will. Thank you.
All right. Next agenda item, fall back to school plan update.
Well, as you can see already, I have a tough act to follow, and I'm not going to speak to a PowerPoint presentation per se, but what Vicki has just displayed on the screen is the result of a lot of work that has gone into the past few weeks in preparing essentially an overview of our plan at this point for our community. So what I'd like to do is unpack this first page, help you understand the format of this document so that as it becomes more publicly shared, which it is certainly available through our board docs and this meeting presentation, we are going to formally share this document with all of our families tomorrow, along with 3 surveys. We have 3 stakeholder surveys that are going to correspond. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But what I'd like to do first and foremost is just elevate the work of our D38 stakeholder work groups. We have essentially 5 work groups that are spending time on a week-to-week basis in partnership, as was mentioned earlier in Ms. Phillips' board comments, with other surrounding El Paso County districts and ongoing work that's being supported by the district management group, which we've contracted over the summer here in our preparation process for our back-to-school plan. And that's what we're referring to this plan as, is a back-to-school plan from this standpoint. We want to make sure that our community understands how invested we are into developing a plan that is reflective of what our students and what our families deserve, which is coming into the 2021 school year with hope, with optimism, with high energy, and with a focus on learning. So what I'd like to do is just briefly share with you how this document has come to where it's at today. The reason it was a little late in getting to you all is that we have been really working on this live and in living color, so to speak, minute to minute, moment to moment. And just wanted to highlight again the great work that's taking place from all of the different work groups. And in particular, Julie Steffen, who's putting a lot of time and energy into multiple updates, and she'll share something and I come back and say it needs to have this, and so on and so forth. So we've been at that really all last week and then into the weekend and into today. But we are confident at this point in letting our community know what we do know as of today. And so the way we are planning for our return in August is that we will have our first day of school on August 19th. That is currently identified in the 2021 calendar as the first day of school. We would have new teachers that would be starting with us. I believe it's August 7th. And we have all staff members coming back in, well, all teachers at least on August 12th, and having time to gear up and get ready for a successful launch to the school year. We are basing this plan off of what we know today, which is the latest guidance that we've received at the state and county level is that we should be preparing to accommodate in-person instruction, currently based on class sizes of up to 25 students. That number may change as we get closer to August, using a full, or what we're calling a 5-day-a-week schedule, and presuming a full attendance model. And as those plans are further developed, we also recognize, as was shared earlier, that we may have some families, some students that are just not comfortable for whatever reason returning to school in person, which is completely okay and understandable. So essentially what you have there is our 2 baseline learning scenarios in D38. So the first is going to be just our traditional in-person learning environment. And those plans are based, again, on a full attendance 5-day-a-week schedule. We do, and we will need to continue to have to pay close attention to what El Paso County Public Health Department guidelines will be at the time that we're coming back in on August. While there are some site-based or local control decisions that we can certainly embed within our plan, I do need to remind everybody that we are subject to those local health department guidelines. And the good thing about our current partnership with El Paso County Health is that they are taking into consideration the fact that we have a large geographic distribution, a lot of different dynamics across the unique elements of each of our communities. And so a one-size-fits-all approach is not necessarily going to serve our kids or serve our community, but I also want to make sure that we're not painting ourselves into a black and white scenario of it's either this or that. Masks could be one example of that, and there's a lot of philosophical orientation on one way or another. What does that look like? We cannot communicate to everyone today exactly what that expectation is, but what we can share with you are elements of our planning process that we are closely attending to as we work through our different work groups. And so we are currently preparing for a return to in-person instruction in all of our D38 schools. We will have, and are pleased to announce that we'll have online learning that will be available for all grade levels, starting in kindergarten through 6th grade, as you heard Dr. Benton talk about. We actually have had online learning at our secondary level, both middle school and high school, for some time. So it's not something that's necessarily new and unique, but we do recognize that it is something that may be more sought after as we're currently launching the school year. Just a little bit on our timeline. We are currently in phase 1 of what we're referring to as our initial plan design. We understand and acknowledge that our community wants to know as many specifics as possible, as soon as possible. So this is our first step toward that today. There are still unknowns, as I've shared, but this at least gives us a starting point to launch from. As we shift from that initial plan design into phase 2, more of our preparing to implement the plan, I would anticipate, like this entire situation has taught us, that we will continue to have updates to the specificities of that plan, but we do need to make sure that we're also investing time and effort into that preparation for implementation, which obviously will include training, making sure that we have strong expectations that are communicated, continuously updating our community about what to expect in August, and of course, making sure that we're addressing what issues we have related to funding and being able to execute the plan, which is phase 3. So we are in a position beginning August 10th as staff return, and then we're quickly preparing for students to return to execute, and I'll emphasize as well, adjust our plan as we go. The best way to help you understand the way this document flows is there are 6 guiding principles that we have identified based on, again, the feedback and the dialogue that's occurring within all of our work groups. So I'm not going to repeat each of those to you here, but you can see it starts with health, safety, and the well-being of our students, our staff, and our community. That is extremely important as we make sure that we're attending to those guidelines and thinking through all of the different variables. High quality learning opportunities and consistent academic support. Actually, I will probably highlight real quickly just so you know how each of these sound. The third, and I wouldn't say that these are necessarily in a specific order. They're all important. They're all principles that we feel very strongly about as we're developing our plan. Certainly mental health, social and emotional learning supports, as you heard in the presentation that preceded what we're talking about here, connections with our kids, making sure that we're very intentional about the types of strategies that we're including in the way that this plan rolls out. Staff support and professional learning, extremely important. Any plan that we develop is going to rely on all of our staff to be able to make this happen. We do have to prepare for the potential of either rolling school closures and what that means. What does it look like as we're then thinking through contingencies related to reentry, how long that closure may last, what happens in that learning process at that point, as well as how are we dealing with the facility needs and the needs of the specific students and staff that are impacted, and the whole school community as well. And then finally, the collaborative development, the monitoring and the revision of our plan as we continue to go. So just briefly, Vicki, if you can scroll down, you get a sense of how each of these guiding principles is then represented following that initial introduction. You can see here within the health, safety, and well-being of our students, staff, and community, we have an intro paragraph describing exactly what that principle reflects. And then you'll see key elements of our planning process. So stressing, for example, within our plan, and we're being very intentional about this terminology, the physical distancing protocol. We believe that this is not about a social distancing because we need each other more than ever. But physically distance, there's some things that we're going to have to pay some close attention to. And so here's some protocols that we may be required to implement. Again, keeping in mind that there will be changes and updates as we continue to partner with our local health department in that effort. So we may have to look at some creative solutions, for example, for reducing class size, keeping students in a cohort class, seating students farther apart. We're going to have to think about what do large size events such as assemblies and sporting events look like? Are we in a position where we can just open that up to everybody, or what dynamics do we need to account for when those types of events occur? You can see some of the key issues that we're focusing on in that process, including arrival protocols, how we're looking at meal times, recreation, transportation, et cetera, and some of those other unique challenges related to some classes and programs that do require a high degree of student interaction and proximity. So you can kind of get the feel for how each of these guidelines is going to play out. I really do not want to walk through this entire document with you. I just wanted to call out the initial guidelines that we're working with. You can see here as Vicki scrolling that we do have specific learning options that we want to clarify for our community. And Vicki, if you can just go ahead and just go down to the last page, we can sort of scroll. We're not going to expect anyone to speed read this, but it's, again, accessible through board docs, and it will be accessible, again, for all of our families as we formally send this out via email tomorrow. Vicki, if you go down to that last document, please, or that last page, thank you. So I did want to call out just a little bit more in regards to the collaborative development monitoring and upcoming revisions to the plan. So you can see a little bit more here about how we're utilizing the updates and information from our county health department, as well as how we're leveraging our stakeholder groups. So Vicki, if you scroll down just a little bit more so everyone can see the different work groups. Our instructional core social emotional learning work group is currently led by Lori Benton and Rick Frampton. Our operations work group being led by Bob Foster, resources by Shanna Seeley, stakeholder and communications by Julie Steffen. And then we have a steering committee, which also includes 2 of our board representatives. So thanks, Tiffany, thanks, Teresa. And we're all meeting on a week-to-week basis. We have support that's being provided, as I mentioned earlier, from our district management group partners. And then we have the opportunity for additional regional cohort meetings with our other partners across the El Paso County area, with the other districts that are involved in this process. You can see there is a link to the roster of our work group composition. So we have about 60 people that represent D38 in this process. And then really important is the opportunity for two-way communication. So additional feedback in the form of surveys that will be administered. We have a family survey, a student survey, which I should note was actually developed in part by some of our student representatives. So kudos there. And then we have a staff survey that's also going to be going out. Each of those surveys will be open from June 23rd to, I believe, July 15th. So we're going to use the next few weeks as this plan has been released and as folks are processing through what it means. For example, when we're talking to our parents, we want to know a little bit more about what confidence level they have or what likelihood there is for students, all the students in a respective family, to return to in-person instruction. That will help guide a little bit more, pardon me, of some of our planning efforts. We want to know the intent to utilize our transportation system, what happens in the event that we cannot open on a 5-day-a-week schedule. There may have to be an adjustment there with some different contingencies. So some data that will help inform what those contingencies look like. We want to know from our staff. We want to understand more of what their concerns, their current attitudes and perspectives as it pertains to everything from health to their ability to leverage this environment to the fullest extent of their ability, understanding that there's a lot of different needs that we have to account for there. And we want to hear from our students. The student survey is specifically designed for secondary level students, so grades 7 through 12. And again, those are student produced or generated questions that I think will help us get a better sense of some of the thoughts, questions, and different needs that our students are bringing into the equation. Again, that then will help feed our next phase of additional plan specificity and development as we're preparing to implement. And what I would just add is that as challenging as this is, it's nice that we have a team that is committed to collaborating with each other to produce the best possible outcome across the board. And what I would also emphasize is that we want to understand, we want to know exactly where our families are with respect to their questions and their approach to this upcoming year. I don't want any family to feel like we are trying to force anything upon them or leave them out in an effort to ensure that we're inclusive of each and every one of our students' needs. So I did a real fast job this evening of just kind of sharing with you the overall structure and format of this document, but truly, if you spend some time reading through each and every one of these layers, hopefully you can see the amount of thought and intention that is going into producing the best possible plan, recognizing that there's certain things that are outside of our control, and then the things that are within our control that we're going to do whatever we can to produce the best back to school plan possible. So I know that's a lot to just throw at you. I also have a great team to be able to address any questions that you have. So we'll open the floor up to that and go from there.
Hey, Casey, I'll start off. And maybe this is better, a question that Dr. Benton might be able to serve better. Could you speak to the fall, what that would look like with the online learning that we have from being a part of the stakeholders group, which does consist of students and parents and staff and community members. That the way I understand it, the online option does not include classroom teachers wouldn't be expected to teach online and in the classroom. Is that?
That's correct. Separate teachers.
And then to that, if in the event the county deems that we have to shut our doors to in-person learning for time being, would the students go to online, or would it be a separate e-learning? I think that's still in the development, but I'm not sure.
Basically, that's where we would, word of the last few months, pivot to the remote learning approach. So learning, if we could not accommodate it in person at school, would then be provided by the student's assigned teacher or teachers based on their schedule. And we would be implementing what we're referring to as more remote learning. So that's a contingency plan. And Vicki, what might be helpful is if you go up to the second guiding principle, the high quality learning opportunities and consistent academic support right there, you can get a flavor of what the different options are by level and how we're approaching those enrollment considerations, recognizing that, for example, we may have a family that says, I'm just not comfortable starting off the year with in-person instruction. What we would envision is that they certainly could opt to enroll with an online program or online instruction at the beginning of August and through the first trimester period, about November timeframe. We would work with that family closely to examine if they would want to continue with that same approach in November, or if they could potentially be interested in going in person at that time. It looks a little bit different, obviously, at middle and high school because we have different timelines and considerations around the specific classes that they're in, and how we don't want any student to be impacted negatively by making a transition midstream. So we can't do, like, the door's not always open from one week to the next, but it's going to be reflective of helping process through what those options look like, corresponding to each individual's needs. I should note that also at the middle and high school level, we could very well develop a part-time online and part-time in-person at school schedule, which we currently have some students doing even before all of this happened. So I took an initial stab at that. Dr. Benton, is there anything that I missed that you would want to touch on?
I think you did a great job.
Thank you. Did that help answer your question, Ms. Upchurch?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure I understood. It raised a question that yep.
It's a good one. What else?
All right, if there's no further questions, thank you much, Dr. Summers, for the presentation. Mr. Foster, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So there's no more questions. I just wanted to also say thank you, because I really think that enough thanks hasn't been given to the amount of effort that has gone into this whole planning process from, again, all these committees and our community involvement, and all of our districts around the Pikes Peak region being on the same page of writing to our county health department and wanting that 100% reopening, and a lot of questions and a lot of just a lot of feedback and a lot of questions. And I think that a lot is happening really fast, and I appreciate all the effort and all the collaboration and communication and transparency that's been going into this. And I appreciate the willingness and flexibility as well. So thank you, Dr. Summers, and to the other team members, and to our volunteers within our community that have been engaged in this on a weekly basis as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ms. Upchurch. I would just add, obviously, that same level of appreciation from our perspective in a staff role, that the community is really rallying around each other to do the best job that we can, to develop the best plan that we can. Obviously, it's our responsibility. We're going to continue to do this with focus and with resilience. And then I will add one more thing, just from a communication channel perspective. All of the information that is in this PDF document will also be built into an updated website that may not be available as early as tomorrow, but it's in the works. We'll get that out as soon as that is ready to launch. And so the same documentation, the same content you'll see in a more digestible manner, if you will. This is quite a bit. In fact, it's probably one of the more robust plans that we've seen, and we feel very strong in that, because we understand how many questions and how many considerations there are that we need to include. And I think there was one other point I was going to make on that. Well, just the fact that we'll continue to update as we go forward. So we do need a little bit of a pause in between a release like this and in our next round of updates. So I would anticipate more information, more specificity by, I'll say early to mid-July, probably by around July 15th timeframe, where we can dive into more of those details, because that's a lot more of the work that's going to be happening in our work groups. And I'm confident that we'll, any questions that have not been addressed up to this point will be further fleshed out as we get into more mid-July timeframe. So again, thanks for everyone's patience and support in that process.
Dr. Summers, just briefly, that time frame you just laid out will give time for the surveys to go out to parents, students, and staff?
Absolutely. Yep. We're going to keep those surveys open for at least a 2 to 3 week window. Staff, I think we're going to keep open a little bit longer, because there's some real informative information there. Families, we want to give them enough time to be able to process through it. And what you'll see in the surveys, I didn't have those queued up to be able to share with you through this meeting, but we're creating, I want people to know that the information that they're providing through the survey is not locking them into any specific step. It's just to inform where we're at as of today, as of this information. And it'll help continue to inform the work of the work groups. And so we'll be that much more precise as our planning efforts become more pronounced on exactly what those plans will be.
Dr. Summers, Chris, are you finished?
Yes, go ahead.
Pardon me, I didn't mean to talk over you. I had two things I wanted to ask you, Dr. Summers. One is, we're headed into July, which is usually a sort of lower communication month. You've been sending out generally weekly emails. And are you anticipating that you'll continue doing that to update families, or is that pulse going to change?
It's a great question. I do think we're going to pause on the frequency of communication for the next few weeks. I would say at least through the first week of July. And this is a lot to digest. So that's why we put a lot of effort into this formal plan overview. If there's something drastic that's an update that we think is certainly needing to be shared sooner rather than later, we'll certainly get that out. But I would envision a little bit slower of a pace over the next couple of weeks. Let this digest and just kind of simmer a bit as it gets out there. And then we'll come back in, like I say, probably that second week of July with a new round of communication at that point.
Okay. And then secondary to that point, do you anticipate that families will be signing some sort of letter of intent so that the district can gauge how many will be in person, how many will be online, or some sort of hybrid?
So I think our survey, as that is processed by our families, will give us that first layer or level of response rate. that will help with that processing of information. At this point, we do not envision the need for a letter of intent per se. What we may have to do as we get closer to August is reach out through our schools. Each of our school sites would confirm with their rosters as they currently are constructed with some type of confirmation note. Just, letting us know, hey, what exactly are you signing up for as we go into the fall? And that would probably be, again, on that mid-July timeframe where we're asking for more of a commitment at that point. But I do think our survey is constructed in such a way to get that initial level of data without being too intrusive or expecting too much from our families.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
All right, any other comments before we move on?
Well, I would just like to ask if this is a good time to ask the district to talk about the vestibules and the security that I brought up earlier. Is this a good time to basically articulate what I'm looking for, and that is, what would the cost be? Is it possible to do what I suggest, etc.?
Chris, here's what I would suggest is that seems like a topic that would be at the purview of our operations and our resource working groups. I am not in a position at this moment to provide really any more of a response other than to say that we can absolutely look closer at that issue. I would also add that we want to make sure that we understand kind of every aspect of that from a 360-degree lens. But I think this is exactly why we have our work groups. So I would prefer, if you're okay, to allow that conversation to bubble up through that process. And then that gives us an opportunity to define more specifically what we would like to investigate and how that can help be part of our planning process. Is that okay with you?
Sounds great.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Foster, land discussion.
Yes, you have before you, the board has before them a proposal, the initial proposal from Woodmore Water. Woodmore Water has approached the district regarding a piece of land to the very north and west, It would be adjacent to Deer Trail and right next to where Woodmore Water currently has a water treatment facility on the north edge of Lewis Palmer Middle School. Their proposal is to trade or sell us that piece of land and trade for a pumping station, which would then provide non-potable water to irrigation of the Lewis Palmer Middle School fields, and that any cost that was in excess of the cost of the land would be defrayed by Woodmore Water, charging us the higher potable water rate until such a time as we paid off the remainder. This would allow us to put the approximately 4+ acres of Lewis Palmer Middle School on non-potable water. And after the initial payment of the cost of this project would net us somewhere in the realm of $8,000 to $10,000 per year in ongoing savings from the relative cost of non-potable water versus potable. That becomes a little sticky because non-potable water in Woodmore Water Association gets an additional surcharge that throws a monkey wrench in the mathematics of saying it's a X amount for Y amount cost savings. But just seeking the board's approval along these lines to further investigate this and hopefully come back with final numbers and things like that in the August timeframe. Woodmore Water is seeking to have this done. What they're doing is taking and creating a holding tank on that northern end of the land there to hold water for their treatment facility plant and increase their capacity for Woodmore Water.
Mr. Foster, what would be helpful for me is if you could have them submit a rendering of what the pump house would look like, and maybe just a rough sketch of the map, and Now, are these just negotiations, or is what's reflected in this document a offer from them to move forward?
At this point, we're somewhere getting north of negotiations. We've seen some rough sketches of what they have. It really wouldn't change the look of our land. Most of the facility would be below ground. The pumps and everything like that would be below ground. Be honest with you, we don't use that piece of land. We probably never would use that piece of land. So net, it's a benefit to us if we can get non-potable water on those fields. But I can find a sketch and drawing of that. They're in the initial stages of just trying to figure out how much that land would be worth, and what the actual plan would look like for us as far as the money.
And when you say so are they having the property appraised?
Yes, as a matter of
due diligence
and a kindness, sort of a working agreement between the two agencies. We agreed to pay half if they paid half, so that there was no question as to the accuracy of the appraisal by either party.
Woodmore Water has always been very helpful to the district, so I'll be interested in hearing more on this proposal.
You bet.
So are we having to vote to investigate it more, or is this just an FYI that it's being investigated and to look for more information to vote in August?
You would the actual vote for sale and for the property deal itself would be in August.
And what I would suggest is, if it's something that we're really considering, we make it a special agenda item for a work session meeting. So it's recorded, we get it out to the public, and there could be some dialogue before we vote on it in the August board meeting.
Okay.
So some information that would be helpful for me for the August board meeting. I absolutely understand the environmental reasons to have non-potable water on the fields. But I would be curious to know what the difference in potable versus non-potable charges are that we would pay.
I could give you a rough estimate by that point in time. They're about half, but like I said, there's also a different surcharge on top of non-potable water. We did a very similar deal, so to speak, about 15 years ago at Lewis Palmer High School to put Lewis Palmer High School in non-potable water. Saves us. Lewis Palmer High School is bigger, Palmer Ridge is a little smaller, field differentials, things like that, but Lewis Palmer High School still comes in about 10K shorter than Palmer Ridge for irrigation, even though it's bigger.
Okay, and then my one other question I noticed on the consent agenda was our water bills for each of the schools.
Yeah.
Does that July, the July bill for Lewis Palmer Middle School, how does this play into that?
Meaning?
So with our water, is that non-potable and potable water that's in the July water bill?
No, that is all potable water right
Okay.
now. It would not be until this plan was implemented that we could move to non-potable water. Right now, we pump the water out of the building up to the fields.
Gotcha.
Any additional discussions on this topic? All right, moving on to the next agenda item, Board of Education calendar dates for 2021. And I'd like to make a motion to set the schedule for meetings for the Board of Education during the school year of 2021 as presented.
I'll second.
Questions, comments, concerns? Okay, hearing none. Ms. Namika?
Clausen.
Aye.
Ms. Phillips.
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Namika. Next agenda item, financial comparison data.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry, Mr. Clausen. These are our monthly reports that we have for you. Does anyone have any questions? If we can move on to the audit firm financial engagement letter, I would request that we remove that from the agenda tonight. As I was looking into it, it's a commitment for next year. It's for the work that's going to be done for the 21-22. Well, it's for the 2021 school year, but the work would be done in the 21-22 school year. And I'm not prepared to have that commitment. I think our new CFO should be able to be involved in that. And so when they sent that letter over, those dates were wrong. We have already committed for next year to use our audit group. And so I would, like I said, I would like to pull that from this meeting.
Well, perhaps would there be any advantage to just reserving the issue for the August board meeting?
Mr. Clausen, just a quick clarifying point, and it's really no action needed from the board. I think it was just more FYI for you all, so that you know what those plans look like. And Mr. Cruz, thanks for clarifying. As you're looking at that letter, it's just more of a heads up on the audit firm that we will continue to leverage going into next year.
Okay, with
Great.
that being said, I don't know that we need to necessarily pull it from the agenda if there's no action required by the board. So I guess with that being said, we won't spend any more time on the engagement letter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. All right, next agenda item, addendum to the 6th through 8th grade math curriculum.
Hey, Matt, I'm sorry, I was on mute. I was going to interrupt you. I would like to just take a brief moment here and express some gratitude to David Cruz and for the work he's done for this fiscal year. He's helped lay a foundation for a longer term strategic plan. He's just been a class act this entire year. And I think I just wanted to take a moment to publicly express, some deep appreciation for who he is as a person and the contributions he's made to the school district in this year as he came in and unraveled things, I'll call it, and has helped set an agenda and a path forward that is going to be much more beneficial to our school system and to our community. So, David, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I really appreciate that.
Second.
Yeah.
Second.
And I concur with the comments of Mr. Taylor. This is perhaps in regards to the financial issues based on what's happened with the COVID-19 and the money or lack thereof that we'll be receiving from Denver has perhaps been the most challenging year that I've been on the board. And Mr. Cruz has shown great colors. He's been very professional. He's thought outside of the box, and we can't thank you enough, Mr. Cruz.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And Matt, I would just add to your list that people may not be aware the lengths that people go to help us as board members, but twice he's come to my door to deliver things in person. So thank you very much.
I thought I was the only one that he made deliveries to.
I thought that was above and beyond. Thank you.
You guys are kind. Thank you very much.
All right. If there's nothing else, we'll move on to the addendum to the 6th through 8th grade math curriculum purchase. I presume this is probably you, Dr. Benton.
So basically what we just wanted to highlight was we were able to save a significant amount of money by going back and revising our contract after it was brought forward to you. And you can see that our request is actually a reduction by $51,000. It's not necessarily an action item for the board. It's just information because you did already approve the $177,000 purchase. But we just wanted to highlight that we're always looking for efficiencies and making sure that we are as fiscally conservative with the dollars that we have as possible.
Thank you, Dr. Benton. Always like these presentations where we're getting great service or products and we're saving a few dollars here and there. Thank you. Okay. Are there any other items that we need to discuss or items specifically related in the consent agenda before I make a motion?
I just wanted to say that I appreciate, especially during this summer with COVID, that everybody has been very responsive when I've had a question on our consent agendas and I want to reach out and ask. I appreciate everybody being open and willing to answer any questions that we have for you all. So thank you.
Anytime. That's what we're here for. Thanks for the questions.
All right, if there's nothing else, I will make a motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, Ms. Namika, will you take the vote, please?
Mr. Clausen.
Aye.
Ms. Phillips. Aye. Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Aye.
All right, well, this concludes our meeting. We will have the special meeting on Monday evening, but I presume a good portion of our admin team will not be there. So I'd like to wish everyone a good summer. And once again, thank you for the miracles that you worked during the school year and everything that you're doing for our kids. And with that being said, we stand adjourned.